I'm in 8th grade. And I like shopping and Facebooking and texting.
We are the people who will try.
I'm 13 and I'm in 8th grade.
Upon the best of our lives.
I like dancing and shopping.
All humans share the same desires.
I want to get a master's in business, whatever, or be a fashion designer, maybe.
I want to either be a prima ballerina or like the scientific part of criminal justice stuff.
Has your school ever mentioned nuclear warfare or nuclear bombs? Have
No.
they ever talked about that?
Not really. I mean,
we
like,
actually just we read a paper on it.
we
Remember
did?
that?
I guess in history class, but like, not really.
Polaris, the Navy's long-range ballistic missile fired from nuclear-powered submarines now roving the world's oceans, complements land-based weapons for our national defense.
The vast majority of the people in the world today just don't understand the enormous danger that we still face from nuclear weapons. And that's the work that lies before us now, trying to reignite a broad general understanding of what is at stake here and why it is so urgently important.
Those who coordinate the building of our nuclear weapons.
And the importance of keeping alive a sense of enterprise. You know, groups of people working together in common purpose. Arguments, technical disagreements, institutional friction, whatever. That's always been part of the nuclear weapons program. But in the end, it is that sense of enterprise.
This work is to honor the millions of citizens and our greatest leaders around the world who stood up against the weaponizing of this technology and stood up for the future generations of humanity. In 1950, a peace congress was called in Melbourne, rallying to urgently call for an end to testing and making of nuclear weapons in the world. Concerned citizens could not all fit in the hall. In 1957, A.J. Muste leads a Hiroshima-Nagasaki prayer vigil. He and 10 others are arrested entering our nuclear testing site. Their good efforts are carried with us to the present.
So our main purpose was to do something that would highlight and show the resistance that we all feel and the awareness that we all have for the immorality, illegality, horrendousness of even considering ever using a nuclear weapon. And so we had to do something that was a bit dramatic because we were limited people.
Ever cross your mind that you might have lost your life?
Of course, but I believe everybody, they can be killed for doing what they know is right.
You know, after the Cold War ended, we faced a different problem. Everybody began to act as though the problem of nuclear war had gone away. But it hadn't. Just our attention to it had vanished. And we were still left with thousands, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, many of them still today on hair trigger alert, able to be launched in a matter of minutes, and a public which by and large doesn't pay attention to the issue and today isn't really that well informed about it. A whole generation has grown up since the Cold War which never was taught this stuff. It's not their fault, they were never taught about it.
May the bells ring out this message of peace. Men and women of the world, never again plan war. With this atomic bomb, war can only mean suicide for the human race.
From this atomic waste, the people of Nagasaki
can confront the world and cry out, "No more war. Let us follow the commandment of love and work together."
The people of Nagasaki prostrate themselves before God and pray.
Grant that Nagasaki may be the last atomic wilderness in the history of the world.
The last atomic wilderness in the history of the world.
This is the launch site for an intercontinental ballistic missile. These missiles present a screen of retaliatory capability behind which stronger complexes are being constructed.
People of my generation who did know this stuff back in the 1980s have either forgotten it or, maybe more accurately, have actively repressed that information because it's so painful to think about what will happen if there's a nuclear war.
The entire weapons system is deep underground. It is often more economical to excavate the entire complex Construction required removal of 600,000 cubic yards of earth for each launcher complex.
I'd been involved with Physicians for Social Responsibility since 1978. The original organization Dr. Lown founded in the 1960s. Dr. Lown referred us to a series of articles published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 1962, which described in great detail the medical consequences of nuclear war. And all of us were just blown away by this. Like everybody else, we had not begun to understand the extent of the destruction.
The Union of Concerned Scientists was started in 1968. The students that were engaged in this were very focused on MIT's role in the military-industrial complex. My wife, who's followed this for years, will say, we're doing too much research without knowing where it's going. We in the faculty, who had been concerned about the nuclear arms race for a long time, organized this meeting at MIT, which was a big meeting, filled the biggest editorial, generated interest across the country. There was a statement signed by about 40 senior faculty. It basically decried that so much of scientific expertise and resources are being used for the arms race as compared to civilian purposes.
This outstanding success story is the end result of millions of man-hours of the top scientific, engineering, and skilled manpower brains of the country. Over 400,000 people, representing the widest range of crafts and skills, are involved in missile research and development, production, and site activation.
Dr. Lown spoke with Dr. Evgeny Chazov, who was a prominent cardiologist in Moscow and actually the personal physician at the time to Leonid Brezhnev, and said, look, this isn't a military question we're talking about, this is a public health question. And we doctors have a special responsibility to do something about this.
It's still true that what happened in Hiroshima could happen again 100 times more, and I don't see what more you can say. That was as bad as anything we can imagine.
Who have the bigger bomb and who can, exterminate who, and we got to look at the bigger picture because we all connected. You're gonna feel it. Nuking a country, that's part of yourself. I'm going deep, but forgive me.
The missiles, equipment, and crews are sheltered below ground level, covered by cement, steel, and earth. The hardened complexes, called silos.
Why do we give more say to military industrialists, whose holes only hide great purveyors of death, over our good ancient farmers, whose silos have the single purpose of gathering harvest, to help sustain and feed all mankind, to nourish life?
So one of the keys is to nurture community, to feel that togetherness with the people of the world. Here we can understand that we're part of this agricultural tradition that connects all people with the food and goes on all over the world and has forever.
My faith tells us that our job is to love one another, take care of one another, not to walk around with the biggest hammer and see who I can knock down. And that's the only purpose of nuclear weapons. They're anti-people, they're anti-God, they're anti-religion, they're anti-faith.
When they drop an atom bomb, it's not only destroying the enemy.
Enemy is within us. Suffering comes from ignorance, anger, desire, hatred, pride, jealousy. Those are the cause of all the negative actions. Anything that we produce to harm sentient beings is against self too.
We've seen the effects of nuclear weapons in the world, America's exceptionalism. We continue, it seems, like some kind of bad opera or a Greek tragedy, to continue to go in that same direction, thinking now we have to find new ways of using nuclear capability. All the while, we see all of the instability it causes throughout the world.
It's against the ethical body that surrounds Judaism.
The creation is the family of God. So we are responsible to take care of this.
Today, the arsenals have been modernized, and a modern attack on a big city like New York would involve not one 20-megaton bomb, but maybe 10 or 15 half-megaton bombs. The megatonnage would be less. The destruction would actually be greater because it would be spread out more efficiently over the metropolitan area. Within 1,000th of a second of the detonation of this bomb, a fireball forms, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction. Within this entire area, the temperature rises to 20 million degrees Fahrenheit, which is hotter than the sun, and everything is vaporized. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the Earth itself is vaporized.
Test director was God, right? Whatever the test director said happened, and nobody cared about, all some of this other compliance stuff. We went there, got our job done. Now, it is truly bureaucratically a different world out there. But that sense of enterprise and pride and achievement, I can personally testify was there.
To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the explosion generates winds greater than 600 miles per hour and overpressures of 25 pounds per square inch. Mechanical forces of that magnitude will level anything that human beings can build. Even underground shelters collapse when exposed to pressures of that great magnitude. All the oxygen is consumed and every living thing dies. In the case of New York, we're talking about 15 million people.
It's just these are wonderful devices for murdering huge numbers of people. That's all they can do. And is that what you want? I think it's a very simple question. Do you really want to do that? And the answer should be clear.
I mean, it's really very simple what we're talking about.
The operations guys were sitting down. He's like, good.
Don't you think? I mean, who wants to go out and, kill people for any reason whatsoever? Never mind.
Almost all of us don't want to kill each other and to hurt each other. Why do we allow that? It's not what most of us think about. We want to help each other and to provide for each other. I mean, that's what we've done forever, and that's what we can particularly do now because we are so connected with each other, and we can connect to the things we want, not the things that we fear, the things that we dream of.
So here's the thing, I spent all this time of my life running an animal shelter, saving all these animals' lives. We did the math. Since 22 years ago, we saved about 50,000 animals. And every time you bring up nuclear weapons, I'm like, one bomb would kill that and 1 million people in 1 second. And I'm thinking, 50,000 animals. Wasn't that great that I had all this help, all these volunteers helping me? But you have to live under this cloud that at any time, some maniac can drop a bomb on you. And, there are people in office that are, in the old days, we thought everybody that ran a country was a pretty smart dude. But right now,
our country's missile programs are of prime importance to the welfare and security of our own nation as well as to the entire free world. We must respond quickly and decisively in this time of challenge, recognizing that the national interest comes before any other consideration.
우리의 국방과학 부문에서는 주체 102 2013년 2월 12일 북부 지하 핵시험장에서 제3차 지하 핵시험을 성공적으로 진행하였다. 이전과 달리 폭발력이 크면서도 소형화, 경량화된 원자탄을 사용하여 높은 수준에서 안전하고 완벽하게 진행된.
Sounds out of control and insane, right? Excuse us, but these words are straight out of the playbook. They are exactly what we were told and believed.
Such cooperative effort is necessary for the defense and progress of our nation.
Bring the whole family, proud to show our national defenses protection for your safety and security.
A safe, a secure, and effective arsenal to deter any adversary and guarantee that defense to our allies. Unlike many, the American nuclear deterrent covers 31 nations beyond America. These nations are looking at our every move. When we make no moves, they believe that the deterrent isn't protecting them as well. When we undertake the very hard work to modernize the stockpile, the infrastructure, to train new leaders, other nations are recognizing that.
Well, listen, whenever you're selling something, you gotta have a sale pitch, right? And we bought it, right? Are we still paid for it? And that's a problem.
I recently heard something from the great Mort Saul. Of all the great Jewish thinkers throughout history, there's only one that the world really embraced. Over 5,000 years ago, some guy named Moses said we shouldn't steal. That never worked. 3,000 years later, a guy named Jesus comes along and says we should all love each other. Another millennium goes by. Enter Karl Marx. He's like, people, if you can't love each other, if you're still stealing from each other, the least we could do is share. Then entered Dr. Sigmund Freud. He said, if we can't love each other and share with each other, we might as well try to understand each other. Finally, there's one Jew that comes along, embraced by all the world powers. Although he was opposed to it, he helped invent a weapon that could destroy all of humanity in an instant.
I mean, Einstein was certainly anti-nuke. It was true that he was essentially against all sorts of militarization and against nuclear weapons in particular.
Einstein not only condemned the use of these weapons and fought the development of the hydrogen bomb, but for the rest of his life supported all organizations working to eliminate atomic weapons. Leo Szilard, who helped conceive and build the first neutronic reactor and the electron microscope, was also the scientist who requested Roosevelt start the top-secret Manhattan Project. He and 70 colleagues of this project protested to no avail our military increasingly assuming complete control over their inventions. Governments and military industries only cite scientists that support their goals, not scientists dedicated to pure science and the wider truth for humanity. The Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, those who made and knew the intricate details of this energy and weapon, what it does and how, were ignored, but released their joint statement in 1946 calling these the facts. There is no defense against these weapons. Can someone please tell our military and government representatives after 70 years they still don't believe this? These bombs can be replicated quickly and made in large numbers. The destructive power of each can be amplified. Other nations will soon discover this secret process.
That this would become a dangerous situation was appreciated by many people. Obviously concerned right away to how do we stop this thing, especially by the part of the Manhattan Project that was in Chicago. There was much more thinking going on about how does one deal with this. If we succeed, it's going to be very dangerous, because the physicists never believed that the United States could hold on to this knowledge. They knew, for example, quite a few of the Russian physicists from before the war. The estimate given to the government is that the Russians would have a nuclear bomb within 5 years. Well, it turned out they did it in 4 years during the war. Bohr was deeply concerned and lobbied both Churchill and Roosevelt and asked them to suggest that let the Russians know, because they're going to find out anyway. We could maybe get them more engaged with controlling this, trying to thwart the danger that the nuclear weapon was sure to give. And in the physics community, this was a no-brainer, you might say, that this is a very high-risk thing, and that we probably can't control it once it's the genie's out of the bottle.
The issue of non-state actors is of huge concern to the United States. I know that.
Terrorism is a problem for nuclear weapons because you can't bomb anybody. You don't know where to bomb.
I don't know who the enemy would be.
Straight fact, a nuclear weapon does not kill the enemy. It kills millions of innocent humans, teachers, farmers, children, mothers, and poisons and contaminates our precious earth for many generations to come.
And all you can do is, well, let's have a global nuclear holocaust. You could do that, but you can't undermine terrorism with another nuclear bomb.
How are you going to react to a nuclear weapon attack is beyond me. I can't answer that question.
We should have known this from the very beginning.
Weaponizing this technology will destroy civilization. Preparedness for atomic war will ruin social order. Einstein felt we were being sold a dangerously false sense of security. There is no solution to this problem except a process towards civilian and international control of atomic energy.
We are always worried about dirty bombs here and there. Why? because we play with that stuff and sometimes we are careless. Some other people know its value because, it brings power. The more we have, the more they will try to get. These should be lessons. With money, anybody can get everything nowadays. It's a concern of mine, especially being a parent. We thought that this subject would be part of the past. The priorities are not there. The people who are elected to make decisions on our behalf are not listening to us, or are not really in tune with our needs.
People who decide to use this have no regard for human life. During the Cold War, it was considered a deterrent. If we had it and they had it and we had it and they had it, nobody was going to use it. But there are individuals who don't care.
The justification that was given for nuclear proliferation was nuclear deterrence, right? That nuclear weapons were going to make the world peaceful because the stakes were so high.
Anderson of California. What was your first general impression of the explosion of the atomic bomb a few moments ago? Well, from my vantage point in the crow's nest up forward, I was able to see with remarkable clarity. And it struck me as the most awe-inspiring and magnificent man-made spectacle I have ever seen in my life. Well, Congressman Anderson, in what are you most interested in? I'm interested in knowing if the effects of this atomic explosion are going to have some effect on future world peace.
Justification doesn't really make any sense, since on the one hand, it hasn't stopped war. There have been plenty of indirect wars between the superpowers throughout the world, in Africa, in Asia. So it hasn't made the world more peaceful. What it has done is it has prevented any nuclear war. But you see, if there were no nuclear weapons, then there wouldn't be any nuclear war anyway. So this isn't really a justification at all. It's a sort of after-the-fact excuse.
Of course, there are people who say, well, if we hadn't had the nuclear weapons, we might have had a war between Russia and the United States. I don't, it's impossible to prove or disprove a statement like that.
Yet the world's industrial militarists and their representatives repeatedly self-congratulate themselves with this misleading assumption.
The nuclear strategy is exceptionally complex, particularly in its technical aspects. And unless these complexities are well understood, I think rational discussion and decision-making are simply not possible. This is what we mean by our assured destruction capability, the capability to respond with a level of power so great as to destroy the aggressor.
In time of war, Americans in all walks of life make an all-out effort. Now we have the responsibility of preventing another war. This is the real purpose of the missile sites.
Our security depends upon taking a worst plausible case. We must be able to absorb the full weight of the aggressor's attack and still survive with sufficient power to be fully capable of destroying his society.
Men who mastered their crafts on bridges and buildings must now build structures rugged enough to survive nuclear blasts.
The very design and construction of these missile sites is proof, not just in words, but concrete proof to the world of our determination to survive whatever surprise attack any aggressor may launch.
I think it's imperative to understand that this assured destruction capability requires both the physical capacity and the obvious will to use it. The potential aggressor must himself believe that our will to use it in retaliation is in fact unwavering.
Hardliners from around the world assert the same. Any wavering is considered naive, weak, cowardly, unpatriotic.
The entire economic infrastructure of the country, everything that we rely on to keep ourselves alive, would be destroyed. The transportation system, the communications network, the food distribution system, the public health system, the banking system, it would all be gone. And over the next few months, it is probable that the vast majority of people would die from starvation, from epidemic disease, from exposure, from radiation sickness.
When I heard on the radio that we had dropped a very dangerous bomb, killed a huge number of people, I literally unplugged the iron and went out on the streets looking for some help, someone who could help me figure out what could be done. I ended up in a used bookstore, and the manager of the bookstore was very understanding, and he said, "You should start reading Tolstoy. He has the answers." It's interesting, that's what Gandhi said. And it was someone who sent him some articles by Tolstoy that got him going. So I bought a couple of books and started reading.
Mahatma Gandhi was a prompt and mighty critic on this. With all his heart, he stated, "Has not the atom bomb proved the futility of all violence? I regard the employment of this weapon as the most diabolical use of science, the gravest sin in the world of science. The bomb will not be destroyed by counterbombs. The West today is pining for wisdom. The heritage of all our great teachers speak to us that it is up to you to tell the world only evil can come out of evil, as good out of good." He often quoted Max Mueller that truth needed to be repeated again and again as long as there were men who disbelieved it. A devoted lifetime serving us all. Japan in 1963, did you sing to a public audience when you were there, or was it mainly?
Huge audiences.
Yeah?
Thousands of people sitting all with me. And if you come up and stand near me here, we can sing it and teach it to these folks here. So that the children of all the world may live and grow and laugh and play. Came and turned my bones to dust.
With his dad off fighting the war, Noboru Kimoto was 13 at the impact of the Nagasaki bomb on August 9th. He followed his grandfather back to his school, finding most of his classmates dead or writhing.
He was at his school. The next moment, the teacher said, "Oh, something happened." Then just right after that, big blowing wind coming. He went back to home. His house was everything has gone. His grandfather was firefighter at that time. He had to rescue the people.
The condition of the people who dug among the ashes in order to take away the remains of burnt houses, or who looked after the bodies of the dead. Their condition was the worst.
Following grandfather, on the way he went to his school.
The relatives of the students never found the bodies they looked for. Hearing that their son or daughter must have died in such and such a classroom, they would go there, pick up some scattered, charred bones, and pray.
He saw the unbelievable scene. So many, more than 100 bodies on the ground. And some body is just burned. And somebody is still moving and screaming. Family looking at such a terrible situation, he never forget that he don't want to see any more.
When we put forward the need to abolish nuclear weapons, some people say this is unrealistic, it can't happen. I would turn that on its head. I think it's the people who say we need to continue to possess nuclear weapons who are being profoundly unrealistic. I think, frankly, they're engaging in magical thinking.
It's clear we've been lucky, and there's no guarantee that you continue being lucky forever.
The belief that we're going to be lucky forever is simply unrealistic, and it's not a substitute for real policy.
You can't argue one way or the other with any certainty. All you can say is it's a crapshoot, and so you better have less rather than more.
And I've actually put in quite an effort with military officers, senior people involved with the Strategic Air Command and scientists who advise them to understand the command and control system. And it's a very complicated system. And it is actually rather astonishing. We're very lucky that nothing went wrong.
People draw a very inappropriate false lesson from the fact that we haven't had a nuclear war in the last 60 years. There are many, many instances when we almost blew ourselves up.
In 1950, before crashing, our aircraft dropped its nuclear warhead. 1960 explosion in nuclear missile shelter, 75 acres fenced off, contaminated with weapons-grade plutonium. 1961, a B-52 explodes mid-air and crashes with its nuclear weapons payload. 1965, the pilot and aircraft with its megaton bomb crashes into the Philippine Sea and is never recovered. 1966, a B-52 crashes with its hydrogen bombs, contaminating the area with plutonium.
We lost 4 hydrogen bombs over the ice in Greenland, thereby scaring the wits out of our friendly allies in Northern Europe.
The fire from the crash probably heated the bombs, so they sunk into the ice. The presence of radiation at the scene means that at least one of the H-bombs must have broken open.
Never accounting for all warheads, the crash caused at least 13 square miles of deadly contamination, much of which dispersed into our flowing environment. Danish citizens were enraged after finding they'd been lied to for decades about nuclear activities.
In Wyoming, NORAD, the warning system, and it went, I think, close to the White House, the message that the Russians had launched some large number of nuclear weapons. It turned out to be the wrong computer file had been put into the warning system. It was something that was supposed to be used to test the system.
January 25th, 1995, 5 years after the end of the Cold War, when the Russians thought they saw a missile launch that we had conducted in Norway for scientific reasons, mistook it for a possible attack on Russia, and prepared to launch a counterattack against the United States. And we came within 5 minutes of blowing up the whole planet. Obviously, most of these episodes are classified, and we never even hear about them.
This system is set up to go on 2 minutes' notice.
Dimitri, I'm just calling up to tell you something terrible has happened. It's a friendly call. Of course it's a friendly call. I'm very sorry. All right, you're sorrier than I am. But I am sorry as well. I am as sorry as you are, Dimitri. Don't say that you're more sorry than I am, because I'm capable of being just as sorry as you are. So we're both sorry, all right? All right.
I will be fairly explicit about what we have to achieve. It's not going to be simple. It is quite clear. Just need major improvements within NNSA and Department of Energy and across the nuclear complex to achieve this modernization effort. We must understand the effects of warhead aging without accepting any reduction in reliability. But we desire really to reset the clock, and that's what weapon remanufacturing does.
The use of nuclear weapons is just too ghastly to contemplate. So why you would want to keep on renewing your nuclear weapon arsenal?
To the left, you will see the DoD focuses on setting of requirements, weapon delivery systems. To the right, you will see that the Department of Energy focuses on annual assessment, understanding what is needed for bombs and warheads, the research, the development, the design, the manufacturing, the qualification for entry into use.
I don't think that the cost is at all justifies the maintenance of a nuclear weapon arsenal.
Today's nuclear stockpile and delivery systems, lower left, the sea-based leg, the lower right is the land-based ballistic systems. All of the other elements are air-delivered systems in the third leg of the triad. Both the weapon delivery systems and the weapons themselves now need to be transformed to meet the priorities ahead.
There is no strong argument for guarantee for world peace and security by keeping these weapons.
The photos the public eventually got to see of Hiroshima are truly part of the big lie, for they show a quiet, orderly place of clean streets lined with rubble. They do not show the immense flames, the screams and cries of the writhing bodies of thousands of children and women, outstretched hands, blinded, crawling, who survived for maybe an hour, some a few days of agony, some months with torturous burns and radiation sickness, lying in vomit, blistered, skin sloughing off, with internal bleeding, suffering beyond any neat calculation or measure or journalistic truth. Did we see that? No.
We wouldn't permit any information to get out to be used about the what had happened. Really, it was very managed. You know, we're in such great denial. It was much later John Hershey who really told us what had happened.
Too much attention was paid to the power of the A-bomb and not enough to the evil of the war. Her rather bitter opinion was that it was the more lightly affected victims and power-hungry politicians who focused on the A-bomb.
Too much attention was paid to the power of the A-bomb and not enough to the evil of the war. Her bitter opinion was that it was more of the lightly affected victims and power-hungry politicians who focused on the A-bomb.
She had first-hand knowledge of the atomic bomb, but she felt that more notice should be given to the causes than to the instruments of total war.
She felt that more notice should be given to the causes than to the instruments of total war.
We're all going to destroy ourselves. I think it's very, very important to abolish nuclear weapon. I was only 13, and by losing all my family, so my life had changed completely from them. I didn't even know how to cook rice. By having such a hard time growing up, and a lot of people, they had a wonderful teenage enjoyment, like going out on date. I never knew any of that. Nothing lasts forever. I was not always nice daughter. I never will forget this. I slammed the door and I left the home. And you know, that was the last time I saw my mother. It's always stuck to my mind. This is my message. When you leave home, please have your loved ones. It was very important for me to relate to younger people, what does to anyone who are very innocent.
Some people who had been buried underneath fallen houses and other debris were at first happy to have survived. But about 3 days later, bean-sized pustules began to appear around their mouths, and on the following day they got stomachitis with intense pain. When they experienced great difficulty in eating and drinking, their temperature mounted up. More stomach pains and diarrhea followed. Later, blood appeared. They became very weak and died within a week.
I just kept on thinking, I have to remember good things I had in my life. My feeling is we have to love thy neighbor. You treat other people like you like to be treated yourself. And I live by that.
This piece is about children, those who choose the disease of violence to try to have their way in the world. It's called I Demand Peace for Your Children.
Today, I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons.
All humanity and our Nobel Committee cheered this being said, and then...
This goal will not be reached quickly.
We selectively don't hear the one-line congressional military industries repeat and amplify, reassurance that all can remain as planned.
Perhaps not in my lifetime. Perhaps not in my lifetime.
We look at how much of your income taxes that you pay goes to the military, how much goes to human needs portions of the budget. And that's the purpose of this pie chart. Military spending has not been cut. It continues to rise. Obama is spending more money on nuclear weapons than had previously been done, despite getting the Nobel Peace Prize for saying that he's against nuclear weapons.
And it says specifically that it is our requirement to conduct R&D on a broad range of security, reliability, and control methods and devices. But now it's in a policy directive and obligation. This report says that the U.S. will fund the ongoing life extension program, and we continue at the full build level. We would undertake a modernization program of the B-61 warhead.
The president went to the Senate, but this is the hypocrisy. They're building more, new facilities to build more, and by international treaties that go back to 1970 and before. They're supposed to, in good faith, be dismantling nuclear weapons. And they're not.
Something about being elected president or senator or in Congress that people seem to be caught up in the system, whether it's some right-winger or a left-winger. You can have the best person in the world, but you're still going to get similar policies because the infrastructure is there. It's a systemic issue.
With the election now over, the policy is fairly clear. The administration said, we know what we need to do, we know where we are in it, and now we need to achieve it. It is a requirement that we pursue ways to do that. 76 is right here. It's in full-scale manufacturing. We've moved 4 families of the B-61 weapon system into full-scale development engineering. We've also done that for the W-88.
We have all these money to pour into these weapon of mass destruction, and we are unable to take care of our own. Where you spend it? Not in my pocket. You know, I pay taxes every week. So someone must have been borrowing money on my account. Where's it going? I would like to know, because if I'm the one that's paying this debt, you know, I should be able to say, listen, I need one of those bombs you're making. You know what I'm saying?
We can envision the end, and it's going to be a modernized American nuclear deterrent. The work done at Nevada, by Los Alamos, elements from Sandia, elements from Livermore, just a massive team effort, and I'm delighted. Thank you very much.
The other thing that's a little tricky in the analysis of the budget is that there is the current military spending, and then there is the past war spending. When the government has a lot of military spending, it doesn't have enough money to pay for it all, so it has to borrow money. Then there's interest to pay, and that interest, which is paid every year, is what we call past military spending, paying for past wars. There's also veterans benefits, which are part of past military spending. If you look at your 1040 form, it'll say federal tax, and let's say your federal tax is $1,000. That means about $500 of that $1,000 that you would pay is military spending. Our pie chart analysis depends entirely on government budgets. But the government budget hides a lot of expenditures. The CIA expenditures, the NSA expenditures, there's a lot of black ops expenditures that the government does not reveal. So when we calculate military spending, we have to leave those out because we don't know what it is. We can't make it up.
Somebody got to be accountable. You know, we can't just have a black book and say, I signed this, and you take whatever money you need and you do all the project and get all the great minds of the world, and then we come and build this bomb, and okay, it costs $10 billion. Here's your, your receipt. No. So the budgets that we have are undercounting the amount of military expenditures.
To possess nuclear weapons is a very costly exercise. It's a huge research, manufacturing, and maintenance investment.
President de Klerk not only helped dismantle apartheid, but made the unilateral directive to terminate their nuclear weapons program. Everyone says you can't disarm unilaterally. Yes, you can, and you can profit by it. Presently, it's the only brilliant example of what we all can and need to do. Genuine world leadership. Thank you.
There was an agreement signed between South Africa, Angola, and Cuba, basically ensuring withdrawal of the Cuban troops. The perceived threat of an attack on South Africa was no longer the case. So South Africa started to dismantle its nuclear weapons programs. There were 6 completed devices, and a 7th was ready for assembly. These 7 devices were destroyed by early 1990. President F.W. de Klerk made the announcement, public announcement, that South Africa had in fact had nuclear weapons, but had forgone the option of keeping them.
That's a good model, because it was done unilaterally and without any big fuss, and somehow or other they dealt with the internal politics, which of course was the difficult part.
I spend a lot of time at the United Nations. There's a lot of talk that goes on, but I don't see anything happening. Governments, they're not listening to us. They're listening to their own drumbeat, and the drumbeat is one, this is our power, we're not giving it up.
It's sad that the gains that we made at the end of the Cold War, there was really a momentum towards getting something done in the field of nuclear disarmament. The atmosphere in the world seemed far more conducive 13 years ago than it does now in 2013, for sure. The thing is, the political will is just not there. There's a stalemate in Geneva in the Conference on Disarmament. It's been for more than a decade.
Any wonder why it might be difficult to move our only world organization toward a nuclear-free world when all you need is one veto and the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, with that veto, are all nuclear weapon states?
If you have a situation where a nuclear weapon state keeps on harping on the issue of non-proliferation and not mentioning nuclear disarmament at all in any statements, it's not helping our cause for a world free of nuclear weapons.
Ambassador Zenon Rosides, a constant champion on this subject, pointing out to the world the sham of the negotiations and these weapons, and tried to steer us toward true security. The whole structure of the world would be changed. Even with a few blows, even if the other didn't retaliate, it would be hell. We, the small countries with a small voice, say, listen to those scientists. Get rid of the idea of accumulating nuclear weapons. So why do we never mention and forget all about international security? Because the permanent UN Security Council members have the vested interest to dominate. There is too much economic and political interest in the arms race. The founding charter of the UN says that the Security Council shall be responsible for the establishment of a system to regulate armaments. But why haven't they done it? Because those who conduct the arms negotiations, purportedly for arms control and disarmament, they are the same ones who carry forward the arms race. They say we must see about negotiations. What negotiations? Those are the same responsible for the one and the other. The negotiations have been a stagnant pretense to deceive the people that something is being done about the arms race, which is a galloping reality.
Throughout the UN system, there's almost a paralysis. There hasn't been any agreement or any movement whatsoever, or transparency. We see a hardening of positions. The United States, China, but we also see it the same. We get the same feeling from France. We get the same feeling from the United Kingdom and from Russia, that the 5 are not willing to forego the nuclear weapon option. A lot more emphasis on renewal of nuclear weapons programs.
Precisely the value of the Oslo Conference. We put aside all these very rational, political, legal, or security arguments, and we focused in understanding from a very practical, concrete point of view, is exactly what could happen if there is an intentional detonation or is an accidental detonation. The absolutely overwhelming, catastrophic impact of a nuclear weapon from which we cannot prepare, and it is impossible once it happens to recover from.
Weapon states refused to attend the initial conferences.
We've come a long way, but a lot still remains to be done. The job won't be finished until the last missile is in place. Preserving the peace by promising total destruction to those who would choose war.
Is this not the depth of psychosis? At the very same time, while these 158 countries are working hard conferencing together to halt the nuclear weapons, the business that orders and makes them continues unfazed, rapidly moving forward, holding their exclusive so-called nuclear deterrence summits in style in Washington, D.C., for hundreds of competing undisclosed contractors, sponsored by our corporations, presented by and working intimately with our Pentagon, Departments of Energy and Budget, our universities, and the National Nuclear Security Administration, among others.
The current UK Trident warhead that's deployed in the present-day Trident strategic deterrent were all developed under this regime, together with the technical collaboration with US scientists and engineers and access to US facilities. I look forward to this interaction continuing and expanding. Testing in our business is as critical today as it was when we started nearly 70 years ago.
The role of money has always been important, but it's much bigger today. Financial world has become twice as big as it was 15 or 20 years ago. It's grown enormously, and they clearly are politically much more powerful than they used to be.
Huge profits for very few people. Where has that money really gone? Into the pockets of the contractors. And where did the money come from? The public. Their tax dollars have just been poured into this. Tax dollars are supposed to be meant to serve the people.
There's a disconnect. There's a couple of things that are obvious. First of all, war is not about conflict resolution. It does not resolve conflict. We know how to resolve conflict. War is not about national security. It does not create national security. We know how to create national security.
This refurbishment, it's a jobs program, a way of keeping people employed. They have to have something for Los Alamos to do, and so they pay huge amounts of money to refurbish the warheads.
It's a great industry for themselves. It does not serve the American people.
The incredible commitment that too many members have to building more nuclear weapons when we don't have any targets anymore. And some people just think of the defense budget as a jobs bill. No, it should just be what enhances our security. And if you can't justify it on that basis, you just can't maintain it because it adds to the instability on the planet.
What is war about? From all the wars I participated in and all the wars I've studied, one thing became very clear to me. In every single one of them, a few people made a massive amount of money or got a great deal of power. And if that is the one constant salient feature, why do we refuse to consider that that's the cause?
They're a business that responds to customers. They respond to orders. They're getting orders to build bombers. And those orders come from Congress. The ultimate question, who decides here? If we still have a democratic system, we decide. Now, if we bail out, which is what we're doing, and pass the buck to other people, which we've usually done also, but we're doing it to a degree that is, I think, is unusual.
Take the $7.6 billion, the cost of the new uranium processing facility at Oak Ridge. In the end, it's really going to be 22 over a period of 10 or 12 years. Now, what could we do with $22 billion? And we don't need any more.
Many of these weapons from
all over the country, go through a quality evaluation process for future shipment back out into the stockpile.
There's enough stored there for 10,000 weapons. The excess material.
Our existing facilities were only built to a 10-year design life. I realistically feel this facility will be here for the next 100 years.
In one warehouse, the warehouse that we reached that day, 400 tons of highly enriched uranium.
Thank you, Sister Megan Rice, for your actions. Thank you for your willingness to focus attention on this nuclear weapons buildup that still exists.
One that's very unknown is the one at Oak Ridge, so we decided to highlight the activities that are going on there.
Our mission is to provide safe, secure, and efficient storage. This facility has been called the Fort Knox of uranium.
We felt we had to, in conscience. We knew about it, and we had to try to share that knowledge and expose the reality.
The cornerstone in that transformation process.
A huge secret, and it's been a secret since it began.
Those weapons come in, that uranium is then packaged or it's downblended. This container was developed in order to store a large quantity of nuclear material in the smallest footprint possible. This container has a neutron poison, which actually allows for that safe, dense storage.
This fence we deem to be illegal because it's keeping out the truth. We all have the responsibility to expose crimes. So we were able to pass through the first one, cross a road. We saw a security car go by. It never saw us. It was still very dark. And then we came to the 3 fences that are just before the building, actually. And we were able to cut through the first, cut through the second, cut through the third. Less than 10 minutes. It was not difficult at all. We actually brought some crime scene tape that we had labeled nuclear crime scene. And we found 3 pillars at the end of the building, and then prayer together. We had candles lit. When the guard got up to us, we could hear him saying 4:45 in the morning, "They are peace protesters. You better send some people." He was very calm about it.
This experienced guard was fired for not shooting them immediately or forcing them to the ground.
And then we said, "Could we please read this statement to you?" And he didn't say no, he didn't say yes. We were just waiting for whoever was going to come. So we were able to read the whole statement to him, and it's very beautiful.
We thank you for your courage. It's important that we have nuns on the bus, not under the bus, which a lot of people would like for you, sister. They think you should be punished and not praised. That's ultimately what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. You can't build more nuclear weapons and cut Medicaid and cut Pell Grants and cut Medicare at the same time. It's not just the arithmetic doesn't add up if you say you're balancing the budget, but the morality doesn't add up. It's just wrong.
The way our corporations would like it as well. Most non-Western nations' arms industries have no public transparency or accountability. Unlike these 3 who went to jail willing to pay the price to help expose truth, these industries that break the law where people die, if ever caught, settle out of court. There's no prison time. All American? I think we have better examples. Ever pervasively advertised to the public. They're good, wonderful charity foundations. Hide from us that the great bulk of their profits and industry is military focused. Stealing themselves behind patriotism, we too rarely hear of even a handful of the known out-of-court settlements. These are the very industries that can and must transform. For us to have good jobs and focus of our greatest minds toward creating and building what enhances all of humanity.
He warned us of exactly what you're talking about. When he warned the American public to beware of the military-industrial complex. It resonated very much with me that this is a risk, that it's the best interest of many businesses that we be on a war alert, and so we're manufacturing tanks and helicopters and bombers.
Such a profound stake in the arms industry which governs this country.
Was already widely understood to be a very powerful element in American politics.
I was at his inauguration. He had the great credentials of having ran the whole European war, and he was just an idol.
He made the genuinely radical statement of
the military-industrial complex and its nuclear component, which Eisenhower talked about.
Sat there in the White House and really looked with dismay at how little power he had.
Yeah, that is a problem, and I don't know what the answer to it is, other than to vote in legislators who will draw the line on that and won't permit, will pull back on the amount of militarism that we do. But I find that wealthy people are more influential in government than poor people, so we continue to go the way we are.
Our senators and congressmen of these areas have inordinate power, for these facilities are the primary source of good-paying jobs for these districts, accruing huge payoffs. The call is to demand the leadership to transform. And what happens when representatives do stand up on this?
Madam Speaker, America's nuclear weapons budget is locked into a Cold War time machine. It doesn't reflect our 21st century security needs. It makes no sense. It is insane. Insane to spend $10 billion building new plants to make uranium and plutonium for new nuclear bombs. It's insane that we're going to spend $84 billion for up to 14 new nuclear submarines when just one submarine with 96 nuclear bombs on board can blow up every major city. It's an insane strategy, but it's America's current plan. Let's cut new nuclear weapons, not the poor, the sick, the children, and the elderly of our country. Support and co-sponsor the SANE Act.
So how has our system evolved to not work for the people? The military industry has no worries. Despite 40 representatives co-sponsoring this bill, the chair of the Armed Service Committee simply refused it. He never allows it to make the agenda for consideration. It dies the same day, gone, done.
The corporations are ruling the military, and the taxes pay for it.
We have these companies that are totally dependent on the stream of resources that, in the end, we the voters have given them. True enough, the system is a very distorted system, so if you get 10,000 physicists saying that you should stop sending money to Grumman and instead give it to somebody who's building a high-speed train, I mean, nobody will pay any attention. We just have a very weak political culture. That's, I think, the problem.
You know, General Eisenhower made a quote which I think is very important. He said, every rocket fired, every warship launched, every airplane built is in the final analysis a theft from those who are hungry and are not fed, from those who are cold and are not clothed. This world at war is not spending money alone, is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the future of its children.
These are all really, in the end, political problems. They're not technical problems.
Many crewmen are taking college-level courses under the sponsorship of Harvard University and the University of California to facilitate what is perhaps the most intensive, most sophisticated technical training ever given. Many aspects of it are of postgraduate college level.
Students, professors, university boards, alumni associations, separating the constructive ends from the destructive. What will you do about government and corporate funding you receive toward all weapon aspects? You were made a vital link. What are you willing to bring to light and help lead this transformation?
The irony of this training is that it is not adequate to keep pace with the ever-changing weapon system they are operating. The improved missile accuracy.
Is this what you want? No aspect of these weapon programs would be possible without your university, your tuition, your dedicated research.
Thus, the Polaris program continues. Vital, flexible, energetic.
How do humanities' spiritual and faith leaders help inform us on this? Our Native Americans experience the testing as an annihilation of ancient sacred lands.
The Native Americans teach that we can't think about our generation or even the next generation, that we should always be thinking 7 generations out, and that the choices and the decisions we make now will impact and ripple to the 7th generation.
Around the society, that should be our duty. We think that we are in the most advanced generation in the human race, but now what we do, we just boom, something from top, and you kill entire village people or city. When it's come to this thing, I believe we are heading backwards because we don't look into ourselves as a human being.
Why they are thinking like this? As a common human, as a priest, I am not understanding. We have to use everything for positive purposes only. That means should not give the harm to people, for everybody. Everybody human. You are a human, I am a human, he is a human.
The 10 Commandments were very specific. And every one of them could be interpreted in such a way that it says you can't use a weapon like this. It's not about just thou shalt not kill. Honor your mother and father.
I certainly don't support things that put life at risk. So I think about my child, I think about other children, and not just little children, but of us all being children.
It's our duty to remove this abomination from the face of the earth.
The many situations of inequality, poverty, and injustice are signs not only of a profound lack of fraternity, but also of the absence of a culture of solidarity. Without fraternity, it's impossible to build a just society and a solid and lasting peace. A lively awareness of our relatedness helps us to look upon and to treat each person as a true sister and brother. I make my own appeal of my predecessors for the non-proliferation of arms and for disarmament of all parties, beginning with nuclear and chemical weapons disarmament. Instead of building huge militaries and the modernization of nuclear weapons, give up the way of arms and go out and meet the other in dialogue, pardon, and reconciliation in order to rebuild justice, trust, and hope around you.
The earth is sustainable. Maybe not the way we're living right now, but scientists can show us the way to that new world. We can't wait and expect world leaders to change unless there is pressure from below. We're not prophets of doom, but prophets of hope. Listen to the voices of those who are prophetic. Repentance, literally metanoia in Greek, is to rethink, to reimagine, not to get stuck in solid and old ways, but to repent, to think anew, to think creatively, to envision a world of possibilities, a world without nuclear weapons, a world where our children will be safe, where we can provide for them good climate, good water, good air.
We have been blessed with this human birth. We are all minuscule part of that big soul. There is divinity in us. We become brothers and sisters. Anything created should be for the good of the humanity.
We just don't have the permission, the right. The major works of every religion on the face of this earth, there isn't one of them that says go out and kill as many people as you can.
We're not weighing it with the best of what our people, our human beings bring to the conversation. Look at the countries where these decisions are being made. One group of people are making that decision.
Russian patriarch said Russia needs nuclear weapons in order to continue to exist on a competitive level with the other superpower, which is us. That, to me, is an unreconcilable opinion, but it's his, not mine.
Security comes from love and compassion, forever, interdependence.
The sort of passion or the virility to have these weapons, we're better than that. We're more creative. I don't think we think big enough. There are other ways that we can solve our differences.
We begin every one of our services with something called the Litany of Peace. In peace, let us pray to the Lord. And then for the peace of the whole world. It's a common sense issue. We can't invest taxpayer dollars, billions of dollars, to update nuclear weapons and expect that something different is going to happen.
Tell them, stop this Holocaust.
I always ask the question, do you really need this? There are many people who work hard, but they're not making ends meet. We cannot sit down. It does not absolutely make sense to me. All of us should be working for the human interest.
If only it is possible to stop this mad thinking of creating more and more of nuclear weapons to destroy people, it will be a good day, bad day for us.
If we are waiting for a Messiah to come, he may not get here in time. So please, do whatever you can do.
One wants to build Tibet as a demilitarized zone of peace.
The stockpile of these awful weapons itself is something really wasteful. So nobody wanted to use this weapon. At the same time, billions and billions of dollars spent to make these weapons. I think itself something contradiction. And if we use this weapon, that also very awful. There will be no winner.
Mother Teresa isn't a plastic icon stuck in the past. She was the toughest spiritual soldier. These weapons contradicted her life's service. She didn't discuss nuclear weapons. For her, it was all politics. But there was a good reason she took the time to travel to and bear witness in Nagasaki, saying repeatedly, "We have forgotten that we belong to each other. How to bring people to love each other is much more important." Our great moral voice.
For the survival of man, when I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life.
In 2007, the Greek Patriarch of Constantinople met with the Pope and issued a statement calling for the decommissioning of nuclear weapons as being the only competent, moral, and courageous roles that leaders can take in the world today.
Nelson Mandela always despised the bomb, seeing it as a grave danger for universal human rights, his overarching passion. He called for African unity to establish a nuclear weapon-free continent. He stated, "Those with elaborated and sophisticated arguments to justify these terrible weapons call it naive, but we must ask the question, why do they need them anyway?" He then presented a resolution titled, "Toward a Nuclear Weapons-Free World, the Need for a New Agenda."
You never waste your time if you're an advocate for nuclear disarmament. You have to keep on raising this issue. And we do so on a national capacity through the non-aligned movement, through the African group.
South Africa and the world had another courageous and bright model of a country, Sweden, that had everything needed and prepared for these weapons and chose not to have them.
Sweden, rather quickly, in a matter of 1 year, they came up with a sort of blueprint for what it would take to build a nuclear weapon. The head of the Swedish Air Force argued for acquisition of Swedish nuclear weapons. Delivery vehicles were under either production or in service, actually. In 1956, they came up with what was called the Swedish line. Build small nuclear reactors using natural uranium and heavy water, and the electricity and the heat would go to civilian purposes while the military would take the plutonium. The reactor was built, but it was never used as a nuclear reactor. Because what also happened on the political level, primarily in the late 50s, opposition began to mount from the women's part of the party. They were the ones who questioned the acquisition of nuclear weapons. The debate became much more fierce in Sweden. There were demonstrations against the nuclear weapons. The head of the Swedish Social Democratic Party was pro-Swedish nukes in the beginning, but he changed his mind and he came out against nuclear weapons. People started to ask the question, if we acquire nuclear weapons, and if we use nuclear weapons to defend ourselves, the opponent will of course also use nuclear weapons, and that would mean that all the population centers will be wiped out, there will be nothing left. Will it be worth it? Why would we defend when there will be nothing left? In the end, there has not been any sort of discussion whether it was the appropriate decision to take in 1968, years after he became a main proponent for nuclear disarmament instead.
As we witnessed in Sweden in the 50s, it is an understatement to recognize that one of the great struggles of the past centuries that has uplifted all mankind has been the women's movement. And here, women knew intimately the fallout and radiation would harm and kill untold unborn within them.
If you begin to question, government was saying, there's no problem with the testing bombs in the atmosphere, although the radioactive isotopes were being picked up by the clouds and they were floating over.
Who can tangibly experience the impact to her children better than a mother? Although always a solid part in all the protests for sanity regarding wars and nuclear weapons, women had innumerable specific actions on nuclear issues. It's fair to say this nuclear issue began a new vital era of the women's movement. The bravery they coalesced broke all barriers, gathering together women of every nationality, race, and religion. One world. Despite our systems that marginalized their voice throughout, it was a constant driving force to which all owe great recognition, gratitude, and debt. May it reignite and flourish today with saving our Mother Earth's children.
Some of us worked very hard to not give our children the fresh milk because the cows were grazing. The radioactive isotopes were in the milk. So I was running around buying up old powdered milk, and they didn't like it. And I would, put strawberry flavoring in it or chocolate. I finally woke up one day. I said, there's a political solution, and I got to organize to get other people. We found women were very concerned. We were doing workshops for our children, give them a paintbrush instead of a bomb.
Arrested in England for dancing atop a missile silo. While the West immediately cheered with jubilance the atom bomb over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one American voice in their monthly clearly stood apart.
In September of 1945, the first newspaper after the bomb was dropped, Dorothy Day writes this. The article is called "We Go on Record. We have killed 318,000 Japanese. They are vaporized, scattered, men, women, and babies, to the four winds over the seven seas. Perhaps we will breathe their dust into our nostrils, feel them in the fog of New York on our faces, feel them in the rain on the hills of Easton. We have created destruction." And so marks the cry against the nuclear weapons.
My father worked on the B-29 project from the time it started. That was the plane which was used to hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't think people realize fully the impact the nuclear weapon had on people my age in 1945. It was part of what caused the Beat Generation, because for the first time in history, we found that history had become optional. We might not have it. It also was one of the reasons you had a rejection of the materialism of the Beat Generation, because the world was almost immaterial in a nuclear age, or it could be immaterial at any moment.
Imagine over millions of years our ancestors, human beings, have struggled to fulfill an extraordinary intelligence and destiny in this vast space, our precious footprints, all erased by the hand of a small few power-hungry minds, insisting they were being honorable in protecting their own.
The fact that very soon after the end of this war, in which the enemy was Germany and the enemy was Japan and the ally was the Soviet Union and China, we, being told within a matter of a year or two after the end of the war that the enemy was in fact the Soviet Union and was China, and the allies were going to be Germany and Japan. I mean, you have an enormous ideological challenge to kids who sort of feel you've changed enemies too fast. That had a very profound impact, certainly on me.
An enemy to risk it all.
Nevada, USA. This is the valley where the giant mushrooms grow. More atomic bombs have been exploded on these few hundred square miles of desert than on any other spot on the globe.
The name of my unit was the 1st Radiological Safety Support Unit. Atomic bomb testing area. It was probably illegal that I took it at all. This is where we lived. And every morning we would drive through this mountain pass down here out to the control point, which is up in here. That's where most of the shots were done, in Yucca Flat. And this is Frenchman's Flat, which is where the atomic cannon was tested. Korea, which was an active war at the time, so I volunteered for this secret mission. Next thing you know, the train stops at Las Vegas Station. And the sergeant comes in and says, okay, you guys, grab your gear. 60 miles north, we come to Mercury, Nevada, which is where the Atomic Energy Commission's test site was for testing the atomic bomb. And it was then that it dawned on us. 2, 1, and then the entire desert lights up. You're squinting inside these 4.5 density guns. But there's no sound, it's dead silence, which, normally we expect a sound with an explosion. And so then the guy says, the shockwave will reach the CP, which is the control point, in 10 seconds. Then he goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and whammo! You're like this, and there's dust and rocks and pebbles and all kinds of stuff flies up in your face. And then you could hear it echoing all over the desert, the canyons, as it goes on further down the way.
After the explosion, Air Force helicopters survey and monitor the acres of blast area with sensitive radiation counters. Charting super hot areas, probing for usable approach lanes for bomb damage assessment teams.
The job that I was assigned to do, processing film that can be used to detect how much radiation you might have received. So then we logged in Jones, May 1st, 1953, got so much Rankins of radioactivity. If you got 3 or more Rankins, you had to leave the flat. Sometimes people would come in and they had far more than that. The bomb is so hot, it basically melts the sand underneath it, like a glass type thing. And that whole area around it for like a half a mile would be very radioactive.
The guys that got hit with the radioactivity, incidentally, were the soldiers at Camp Desert Rock. They've had those guys go in over ground zero, and they got tons of radioactivity. Had bad reactions to it. It was pretty bad. They called birth defects and all this kind of stuff.
Our atomic vets had to fight long and hard to be barely recognized for their suffering and deaths as a result of exposure. Albert Schweitzer was considered in his time one of the world's most distinguished moral voices of the world. He called for the abandonment of both nuclear testing and the production of nuclear weapons. He took a stand that disarmament be under international control, and that the issue of verification should not be an excuse. He stated, "The new man suffers from a fatal flaw. Because he has failed to rise to the vast reason required to accompany this vast power, the conquests of science and technology become a mortal danger to us, rather than a blessing."
Staffed by top scientists and medical men, these schools train selected students from all branches of the service for radiological safety missions with work in contaminated areas. The Radiological Records Unit will maintain complete exposure history on all personnel. It will prepare recommendations and make permanent records concerning all exposure and overexposure. The staff has established the maximum individual dosage of radiation at 1/10 Roentgen per day.
We are constantly being told about a permissible amount of radiation. Permissible? Who permitted it? Who has any right to permit it? This propaganda about safety will continue, but I believe the truth will reach and influence an ever-increasing section of public opinion. The awareness that we are all human beings together has become lost in nationalism, war, and through politics. In resigning ourselves to this fate without a struggle, we are guilty of inhumanity. This realization should shake us out of our lethargy. All that we have ever possessed of true civilization can be traced to the manifestation of a humanitarian spirit. Today, if we are to avoid our own downfall, we must once again commit ourselves to this spirit.
Weather conditions must be right for test purposes and air operations, and from the standpoint of safety, the priority watchword of the whole program. The huge fact which remains after every nuclear detonation, the towering, angry ghost of the fireball. Payoff is knowledge of wind speeds and wind directions. Advanced techniques make it possible to fly through the cloud without harm, even to stay inside of it for a while, if they observe the precautions taught by experience. Operating complex electronic recording devices of great importance, the men in the cloud tracking aircraft will follow the cloud hour after hour as it is carried cross-country by the wind, checking its spread, reporting every phase of its movements.
Meticulously mapping the daily movement of the contaminating nuclear cloud of just one nuclear test as it circles the globe with the currents of our atmosphere. Does any nation have any right to poison our Earth, our habitat? In 1954, the Japanese Council Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs collected 35 million signatures banning nuclear weapons and tests in the Pacific. Ignored. In secrecy, knowing its extreme toxicity, carefully measuring and recording each test's effects on animals, aquatic life, our environment, our soldiers, and the ability to destroy all structures, we went full speed ahead test after test, at times multiple tests in a day. A small taste of a couple sampled measurements of radioactivity.
A lot of that radioactive dust ended up going into small towns north of where we were, St. George, Utah being one. It has a very high rate of deaths by cancer in the ensuing years after that. And a number of movie actors, a great filming place for a lot of Hollywood movies, these westerns, and several died of cancer in the 10 years after that.
This 1951 pamphlet spread around Las Vegas and the state clearly displays the lies to us. The warning is about security restrictions to citizens, not hazards. It states, authorities have determined there is no danger expected from the ongoing testing, and safety will be maintained.
My unit posted these film badges all over Nevada and Utah, and then our guys would go around and collect them and develop them to find out how much radiation fell in those areas, and it was a lot. So that's sort of the dark side of some of this.
Thinking of test ban treaties as weakness and referring to those who questioned unrealistic and unpatriotic.
How many know 1,000 atom bombs and how much cancer was carried all around the planet?
One Roentgen causes the possibility of increased incidence of disease. There is no doubt that every bit of radiation, every added amount, is dangerous to the health, to the pool of human germplasm of the human race. Fallout radiation, strontium-90 and similar things, radioactivity that's being released, spread over the world, dropped down. Everybody in the world now has strontium-90 in his bones, radioactive material, and nobody had it 10 years ago. Strontium-90 did not exist. This is a new hazard to the human race, a new hazard to the health of people. And scientists need to talk about it.
He delivers to the UN over 11,000 respected scientists' signatures from around the world, urging to stop all nuclear weapon testing. Obviously, statistics can be very tricky, and there are many other variables like population growth. However, couldn't we be directing our money and scientific minds toward preventing cancers rather than processes we know cause cancer? While we deeply appreciate the research towards cures and treatment, cancer is often the result that has taken many of our loved ones' lives away. Could we ask all our foundations to stand up together to denounce these industries' deadly contamination, these known, well-researched causes of cancer?
Not only does atomic energy present a major problem of control to the United Nations, but the life-killing rays are ever present in the day-to-day work of the atomic scientist. The deadly radioactive matter. A protective wall of 4-inch lead blocks and fingerprint patterns may be changed by an overdose of radiation. Can atomic energy be harnessed to increase the yield of agriculture, to drive trains and ships, to heat and light whole cities? The answer to most of these questions is only a matter of time. If his wisdom can keep pace with the advance of knowledge, he may yet inherit the bright world that science can build.
You're looking at the world's first floating nuclear power station, a converted World War II Liberty ship, the Sturgis. She carries a 10 million watt power plant, which could supply the electrical needs for a city of 20,000 persons. Its use, military operations. A 35-man crew will be aboard to operate and maintain the nuclear system. The Sturgis, forerunner of many such atomic power plants of the future.
With an operating cost so high it was retired in 1976 and nearly sank a year later in a storm with all its radioactive fuel. Stored within contamination barriers, only this year will we begin to decommission it for an initial $35 million. Nuclear power was never cheap, and constant upkeep and decommissioning of our many older plants alone is extremely dangerous and expensive, costing many billions for each.
Every nuclear reactor is a nuclear bomb. And God, why would you put that next to our homes? Why isn't this on the news every day?
Good question. In the early 1960s, Con Edison Electric Company actually planned to go ahead and build a nuclear power plant in the middle of Manhattan, until reason and activism stopped it. Hence Indian Point, just 38 miles north of New York City, Indian Point wide open along our Hudson River, and a stone's throw away.
It's a matter of consciousness and raising the awareness of the public who has to live through, or their children or their grandchildren has to live through, God forbid, through that era of horrific damage of nature indefinitely, and how would they put up with something like that? And why would we as a generation who didn't have enough consciousness or even say in this matter? I think at one point I used to be political, and I was interested in all the political issues, and I totally lost all my political interest except one, this regarding issues of nuclear, because there is no irreversibility. There is no going back. There is no correction. There is nothing that we can do. There's a hopeless situation if we have disaster.
I don't think the human mind or heart can perceive of what we're facing.
The great lie of being clean continues widely by industries and politicians alike because you simply cannot feel or see the radiation leakages. These plants are daily increasingly becoming an extremely dangerous long-term nuclear explosion problem. Yes, remove the labels of safe and clean, for they are neither and never have been. Despite the propaganda, we still have not made nuclear power safe. Vast waste products continue to contaminate our habitats and are still dangerously stored for more lifetimes. And we have the beyond disastrous consequences from any accident of man or nature.
Operated for the United States Air Force by Lockheed Georgia Division. Months ago, this 11,000-acre site was only an expanse of wooded hills. Then the bulldozers moved in. Regular samplings of argon gas are made. Heavy concentration can result in a dangerous level of radioactivity. Downhill from the reactor, radioactive water will be held in this tank until it is safe to pump it to a seepage pit back in the hills.
Over a half-century of secretly poisoning our Earth and our children. It is critical to understand these power plants are a vital step in the making of weapons-grade material required for weapons of mass destruction. By only espousing the electricity plants generate, the arms industry is aided in hiding the essential role these reactors play in the nuclear weapons production cycle. Why countries like Saudi Arabia, with endless pure sunshine, would choose to rapidly build this technology over solar is ours to ponder.
Iran is an earthquake country. I'm afraid for the future of Iran. God forbid if we had earthquakes or anything unexpected.
U.S. nuclear power industries bemoan that because we have the highest safety standards and regulations, other nations' nuclear industries like Korean, China, and Russian are bounding ahead building and planning to build hundreds of new reactors, promising cheap electricity without the oversight and many regulations of U.S. plants, nor a verifiable international safety standard system. Russia's industry, for one, offering to build to anyone in the third world at no upfront cost. A great success story 60 miles from New York City is the Shoreham power plant. After building, it was shut down, stopped by a massive and informed public in Long Island. Residents preferred taking the billions of dollars of shared loss rather than risk their children's safety. Despite the untold costly cleanup efforts and all the promises and assurance, deception and avoidance of accountability rule.
Fukushima, heartbreaking.
Accidents are beyond any true calculable cost. Fukushima, as of this writing, remains highly unstable and a great danger to not just Japan but the world, with its contaminants measured in our fish along the west coast. Chernobyl from the 1980s remains a great unknown hazard, simply buried from view under concrete. Information remains restricted on their deadly pollution, not yet fully controlled. One common link between Fukushima, Chernobyl, and 3 Mile Island is denial and deception by those in charge, and a media supporting the corporate state interests. Nuclear technology fails almost every month around the world. We simply don't hear about it. These accidents ruin and separate us from large areas of our beautiful Earth for generations, and continue to affect great hazard to our ecosystem. No one is against science and technology and discovery. On the contrary, it's our great achievement and inspiration. Most of us are all for progress, furthering research and development of all forms of energy. When we can put the best of our minds to making these technologies safe and no longer weaponize their material, it's a new and better world.
Electric vehicles have been trying to get themselves into the infrastructure of transportation, and they're fighting an industry that's been in place for 100 years. And I say fighting within all of the economic issues of the infrastructure, the technology, the training. Governments have these same entrenched technologies, and they have to be moved by policy. As the world becomes more connected, the transition to solar and renewables, the transition to electrified vehicles is occurring, and I'm confident that with the interrelated cultures and markets that nuclear weapons will take that same path.
Our amazing, precious planet.
change our thinking, we'll start thinking as human beings, as earthlings, you know what I'm saying, and stop the division, you know, and I'm waiting for that day.
Destroy everything we've worked for. It's rarely been a freedom from fear. Some people have found it. We can keep working towards that.
We are polluting left and right as it is. We grew up in communion with nature. It's a treasure that I would like to share with my kids, and my grandkids and great-grandkids should also have an opportunity to experience. People who are concerned, pull their ears off their representative and let them know that enough is enough, so we can be healthy again as a people, as, you know, citizen, a rightful citizen of this earth.
Humanity can fulfill her destiny. We've gone through a lot to reach this point. We've been working very hard, and we can pray for our fulfillment as a species, as a creator.
For us to call life, life without our artist's communicative genius? How do they inform our ability to see, to understand the wider truth? All these would join in New York and sing together John Hall's song, "Just Give Me the Warm Power of the Sun." Take all your atomic poison power away. Everybody needs some power, I'm told, to shield them from the darkness and the cold. Some may seek a way to take control. Perhaps not out on the picket lines, but one of the world's greatest film masters, Kurosawa, felt it important enough to dedicate a movie about a grandmother going mad who survived Hiroshima.
And now they're discussing which countries have the right and which countries have are allowed by other countries to have these weapons, which is a very stupid and to me insane discussion, because nobody has the right. No man can be the judge to kill not another man, but mass destruct humanity. They should get together and discuss how are we going to give nobody the right to have this.
I couldn't sleep at night. I hear the airplanes. Beirut, like under the bombs and people are in the pub. You just continue living. Like you have fear for 1 second, 1 day, 2 days. So when I think about a nuclear bomb, I think it's weird because we're used to all this like on and off, you know? We're always waiting for something to happen. It's a beautiful city. We enjoy our time, we do everything. And when we tend to forget, a bomb, for example, and then people go back to the fear. Beirut is a special place, I guess, because we have this anxiety and this hunger, you know, for living, because you live like unconsciously as if it's the last day. You grab the moment.
I'm a father, okay, which puts me in a superlative existential position as to what have I done and what am I doing by bringing a child into the world. I take that very seriously. You've got to make decisions that are based on a future that is worthy of possession and that does not belong on the scrap heap.
Whenever I think of nuclear weapons, one of the first things that comes to my mind is a quote by the American jazz saxophone player Dexter Gordon. He said that in nuclear war, all men are cremated equal.
Poetry is the creative force.
We're all more into creation than cremating.
The human race differentiated itself from the animals and other beings of the kingdom because the ability that humans have to create and to use tools. These weapons have become more and more sophisticated and dangerous, now totally out of hand. The first tools were tools that men invented to eat. Technology has improved a great deal, it has worked for the betterment of humankind, but this dark side, which is the weapons, it has to be curtailed to fulfill the needs of human beings, and definitely the need of this armed race, extreme power and extreme domination over other human beings is a need that we have invented and created.
Vibration, rhythm, tone, melody, resonance, all these things that we deal with are towards a goal, and that goal is harmony. Nuclear weapons have nothing to do with harmony.
Language has a very practical side. Poien, to make in Greek, is where poetry comes from. And so Poetry is actually the making of new reality. It's its transformation.
The sound that comes from an explosion of a nuclear weapon makes a break in that unity. Then you have the radiation. That too affects all of nature and humankind in an adverse way. It's not contributing to the harmony of what is going on here.
Think about what is a tool and what is a weapon, and promote tools that will be very smart for the future of the human race.
The spoken word is the product of phonemic parcels. The bomb, for example, is, and the word and language are at the opposite end of the spectrum, because they're, I mean, one is the chemical integration. It's language is the main instrument of evolution. We are nature. Language is the thought of the earth. It's formulation.
Modern science is realizing this. You know, ancient texts say this. Sound is in the body. You know, we have the rhythm of our heart. This is why we can enjoy music, and it moves us.
Nuclear destruction, which is the disintegration of everything that has been integrated. It causes things to vanish.
It's absurd. You think about something that's gonna like end everything.
You have the frequency of love and you have the frequency of fear. And a nuclear weapon really is based on the frequency of fear.
What I hate is the anxiety. You see, more than the death, the fear, you know, that you fight every day. That you convince yourself that this is normal, like we're living a normal life or whatever, but in fact it's not normal.
Human life is the product of years and years and years of integration.
This makes also like the future like a question. When you want to work, when you want to do, the game is like very big, you know?
The game?
The game, yeah, like all this political game. If there's someone hearing me that is really like involved or in control of what's happening, although it's not someone, but I think it's like it's wrong to do this. You see, like, I mean, we're humans.
Always a puzzle, because judging from my own self, human beings, you know, they all want to eat in peace, love in peace, dance in peace, laugh in peace, communicate in peace.
I've been able to play with a lot of great musicians from all over the world. The thing that musicians try and do is weave all these different vibrations together to produce a unity. This is the way I think that anything can truly be created that's going to support life on the planet.
They reestablish chaos, because they take what has been perfected in some cases and they just obliterate it. They turn it back to the disordered, in which there is no life.
A moment about drones.
To sit in an office and press a button, to just drop a bomb, that's wrong. It makes no sense. It's just not fair, and it's certainly not just.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
Against all the positive possible uses for drones, world powers are swiftly racing to shift billions towards militarizing and weaponizing them, including nuclear, and using drones without legal precedent for secret government surveillance of all.
General Atomic is now the world's largest producer of drones. You know, they were in the nuclear business when I worked for them. They decided nuclear was a loser and it's far more profitable than the nuclear stuff ever was. But I have grave doubts about drones as well. And drones is a separate problem, but it has the same character.
I was at Hancock getting arrested there. Some Air National Guard guy says, "I risk my life every day for your rights." And I'm thinking, you haven't even risked your life at all. And don't tell me sitting in some drone base here is is at risk. It's not like being in the infantry, I'm going to tell you that much.
I visited the factory in Southern California, and that's a marvelous source of high-paid jobs. They're hiring 100 more people every week.
I came out of Vietnam. One thing was very obvious, is there is no way this process, war, could give birth to peace.
We decry murder in this country and around the world, yet we just embrace nuclear weapons with all our hearts, and I just find that profoundly evil. If there's any way I can stop it, I would. And I just pray that it ends.
There always has been war and there always will be war, which of course is nonsense. There always has been peace and there always will be peace. At any given time, 80% of the world was at peace. Conflict is what gives me permission to be an individual. The question isn't whether you have conflict, the question is how you handle that conflict.
If we could sit down and have a civilized conversation, we wouldn't be standing here talking about this.
When I was a kid, I would go toe-to-toe with my brothers, and we would fight it out. But we were facing each other. I was fighting against what he had done or what he had said, and vice versa. And then it was over, and we made up, and we went about our day. If we're going to continue with warfare, maybe if we could get back to that, to the simplicity of it, and then just shake hands, slap each other on the back, and be friends again.
Warning is flashed along the Civil Defense Network. Yellow alert, then red alert, attack imminent.
This country is ever subjected to an enemy attack. What I am going to show you now might someday save your life.
The threat is enough for the government to decide to take away our civil rights. Now we have the Patriot Act, and now we have the NSA listening straight downhill slide. It will make the Holocaust look like small potatoes. It'll make what Stalin did to the people of Russia small potatoes. It'll make the killing fields in Cambodia small potatoes. It's going to have a lasting effect that you can't apologize for. The Cambodians are becoming more democratic. They're apologizing. All over the place, people are coming to the realization that they can't exist without each other.
It's very unconstitutional.
In disobedience to laws and treaties like the Constitution of the United States.
Congress has to declare war, and the president does not have the authority to just launch on command.
They're now restarting a whole new generation of atomic bombs. I use this word mad in the same because that's what it is. It is just beyond comprehension. Nobody, if they would sit down and have a cup of coffee and think about it, they'd back away from it. It's almost a misnomer because people misunderstand it. I don't mean crazy in a sense of sort of a throwaway word. I mean crazy in a really, really sociopathic way. General Ney, he was in command of Strategic Air Command, literally tried to start a war with Russia. He flew a whole bunch of planes right out of Russia to try to get them to attack, and he was going to go in and bomb their cities in so-called a counterattack.
There was a period where the kids would have, instead of fire drills, they had air raid drills.
In the schools did mean getting under the desk.
Ducked and covered, the siren would go off, we stick our head under the desk and cover our heads to protect ourselves from a nuclear bomb. It's madness.
Everyone had to take shelter. The city had to be totally empty.
There was a huge scare in the city, the safety of the children. A lot of people bought away and thought seriously of leaving the city permanently. Went away for weekends, figuring that maybe on weekends the bomb would come. And
still see pictures of civil defense shelters.
We had a government that believed that we could have a survivable nuclear attack.
All nuclear powers continue to provide this myth.
The most rigorous test of America's civil defenses is coordinated from this Washington Nerve Center. A simulated hydrogen bomb attack that strikes at 75 key targets from coast to coast. Here, every phase is followed as if the attack were real.
Heading south-southwest.
All through the cities and towns you had civil defense. Now, there were no shelters. So what this meant was you would go into the nearest subway station.
In the cities, police and civil defense teams clear the streets.
There was a crazy, idiotic plan that in the Empire State Building, if you were anywhere from the 40th floor down, you would go down to the basement. But if you were from the 100th floor to the 49th floor, you would go down to the 49th floor, as if the bomb was going to destroy everything above you and below you, but you'd be safe on the 49th floor.
Now, I'm not here to try and fight. As a matter of fact, Americans just don't scare easily anyway. And it's a good thing that they don't in this atomic age. But it is a part of my job as Federal Civil Defense Administrator to give you the facts. This sketch will give you a general idea of the fallout pattern. So much for the threat. Now, what are we going to do about it? Basically, there are only two things you need to know how to do to protect your life. One is to evacuate your city before the bomb falls. The other method is to dig deep enough into the ground to escape the effects of blast and heat and radiation.
The whole thing was absolute madness because in the event of a nuclear war, none of this would make any difference at all. Anywhere close to New York City, there weren't going to be any survivors, and certainly not on the 49th floor of the Empire State Building.
Meanwhile, from the Pentagon and other key points, top defense figures are airlifted to secret control centers, from where they would direct America's defense and counterattack.
In June of 1955, Ammon Hennessy and Dorothy Day and other Catholic workers and friends,
Dorothy Day and A.J. Musty and Bayard Rustin and Ralph the GM,
were arrested for being on the street of City Hall Park during the air raid drills. Her statement reads, "We make this demonstration not only to refuse to participate in psychological warfare, which this air raid drill is, but also as an act of public penance." Her action against the nuclear weapons brought her around again to focus on the poor and how all these things are connected in our society. In the next issue of the Catholic Worker, Dorothy Day wrote an article called "Where Are the Poor? They Are in Prisons Too." Half the article is about their action, their appearing before the judge. The judge of the trial said in effect that they were, quote, guilty of the murder of 3 million people in the supposed attack of New York City. But the second half of the article is about her time in prison. She describes the people that she meets and her thoughts and feelings about our prison system. She recalls about how there are prisoners around the world, both just and unjustly imprisoned. And so this experience of the air raid drills and getting arrested also led her to think about its connection with these works that she was devoting her life to, the work for the poor. And it clearly demonstrates how the works of mercy are in complete opposition to the works of war. They returned each year after 1955 to demonstrate the same as they did, just out on the street.
In 56, Dorothy was in the House of Detention. 57, she was in the House of Detention again. 58, she was in the House of Detention again. Each year she was refusing to take shelter.
And then in 1959, in conjunction with the War Resisters League, and notably David McReynolds, there was thousands of people.
I thought it was really insane that we're locking up Dorothy Day because she's sitting in the park. When I talked to Bayard Rustin about it, we would try a 3-level approach. Come down to City Hall Park on the day of the drill. By being there with us in City Hall Park, you would have indicated your opposition to the pathology of people thinking there's a place to hide from a nuclear bomb.
Eventually, the air raid drills became not compulsory nationwide. There was a push for people to build shelters in their backyards.
For some time, we have urged that every family that possibly can build a basement shelter or an outdoor shelter. It is equally important that residents of suburban and rural areas, many miles removed from major cities, also build shelters. They should stock them with emergency supplies of essentials such as blankets, first aid kits.
In my humble way, I went down to the cellar and they told me if you had a card table and you covered it with a cloth and you put some supplies underneath it. Now, up till this point, I had 4 children, but the 5th on the way. I realized that I had to do something, so I got in some water and cans of fruit and tuna fish, and I even remember to get the can opener.
I'm going to tell you, when I was in high school, it would be high school, junior high school in those ages, I can remember looking at these manuals about how to build a bomb shelter, right?
Well, how about our friend Dita, who 60 miles outside the city built a state-of-the-art bomb shelter with food and beds.
Simple underground shelter with 3 feet of earth covering will give you virtually complete protection from lethal radiation.
I couldn't figure out how it worked. It didn't work. But the government was selling these things and convincing people to be building these bomb shelters.
Not only were most American corporations jumping on board to push and be part of this program, GE, Westinghouse, AT&T, Dow Chemical, etc., but our prestigious universities joined and insurance companies went full tilt advertising their special protection plans for an attack. And just like we sold our liquor then, cigarettes and cars with blonde women to go with them.
So we had this dinner party, and we had several of our neighbors. One of them built in his backyard, under cover of darkness. He had these people digging this huge hole, and he fitted it out with air and water and bunk beds for his 4 children, food for 6 months. He had the grass cut out and matching the top trap door and a lock on it, and he had a shotgun ready to shoot anyone who wanted to come in. Someone else said that he had found out that if you had cinder blocks that went a certain way, and then another group that went that way, from ceiling to floor, that blocked the bomb's fumes. And then my across the street neighbor, who was a steam fitter in New York, he said, well, I didn't do a thing. And there was a shocked silence. I mean, everybody, you didn't do a thing? No. He said, look, when that bomb falls, he said, I'm going to be in New York working. My kids are going to be in school, and my wife's going to be in Bloomingdale's.
And they finally went to the hospitals and said, okay, we want you to prepare for a nuclear attack. And it took a while. But the medical community finally said, the emperor has no clothes. We can't do this, and you can't do it either. There is no such thing as a survival nuclear attack.
And with that, he sat down. There was this silence. It's only now that I can laugh about it, but at that point, we thought this was a man who was not interested in his family. That's how serious this problem was.
You have someone like Eisenhower, a general, and certainly was not a liberal or a radical. But it surprised us. When the press asked him what he thought, he said, well, it's a very serious problem. You know, I understand the idea of having these shelters. I don't know, though, Mamie and I have talked about this, and, you know, if there was a war, would we really want to come up out of the shelters afterwards? And he blew the whole thing to hell.
I remember that card table down there.
I envisioned, though, here we are down there, and it's been weeks, and everything's gone except 1 can of tuna fish. And I was saying to myself, do I really want to give it to these kids who are dying anyway, or do I want to have that for myself? And then I thought, well, this is not doing you any good at all. So let's forget the whole story.
I'd like to emphasize this one point in closing. We'll do all we can in the federal government to get information to you on defense against these new weapons as fast as the scientists can give it to us.
And what were top scientists not working for the government saying?
These weapons are just stupid and inappropriate and of no value and highly, highly dangerous. So get rid of them. That's it. And you'll you'll all be a lot safer.
At this time, what was Eleanor Roosevelt, one of our wisest stateswomen, urging for our security?
Any use of the atomic bomb will be a tragedy representing some kind of failure on the part of men and women to get along, to see another point of view, to live with one another in a small world. Many have reached an extreme decision, calling for the use of a weapon indescribably destructive. These people believe its immediate use is the only language Russian and Chinese communist policymakers can understand. Others of us are equally sure that a road to peace is not going to be reached by following any path so destructive. We refuse to give up a hope of agreement while there is still a table around which men gather for the very purpose of making peace, futile though it may seem at the present moment.
I've been disappointed, but I am not discouraged. All of us must keep on hoping and working for a change, constantly asking ourselves if we are doing all we can to make clear our desire to live in peace and friendship with all our neighbors in the world community.
In this time and spirit, Bayard Rustin and A.J. Muste helped organize the first Easter Vigil held in 50 cities against the bomb. In 1958, the two traveled to Russia to help build bridges and to educate citizen movements there and at home against these weapons. Bayard writes to A.J., quote, "We have to be prepared to make terrible sacrifices now, prepared to go to jail or to get shot down if necessary, but to cry out to the American public and the world, with these weapons, when do you begin to draw the line?" We came to know Bayard later as the chief architect behind the great 1963 Civil Rights March on D.C. A year later, he also led one of the first rallies against the war in Vietnam, purposefully on Hiroshima Day. During an era when Americans were portrayed as proud and unquestioning of our perceived new dominance with the atomic bomb, A.J. Muste was arrested more times than one can count. Called the American Gandhi, invoking a spirit of self-sacrifice for the greater good of humanity, advocating our interconnectedness with the world, with active non-violence. When it came to the bomb, he said, "The moment a man thus acts as a responsible, moral being, and not a cog in the machine, all doubts about the reality of his own existence vanish." He coined the prescient phrase, "There is no way to peace. Peace is the way." He consoles our journey forward, saying, "The crucial thing about humans is not always where we came from, but where we are going." As A.J. and the masses confront the Pentagon regarding Vietnam, President Johnson takes an almost unnoticed but critical step forward on nuclear weapons from JFK's direction 5 years earlier.
We shall, as a major nuclear weapon power, promptly and vigorously pursue negotiations to halt the senseless continuation of the arms race.
With war raging, riots in our streets about to erupt again, reeling from the assassination of two of our greatest leaders, Bobby and Martin, nuclear weapons took a back seat in citizens' minds.
To reduce existing nuclear arsenals. It is right. We shall cooperate fully in bringing the treaty's safeguards into being that will prevent the diversion of nuclear energy from peaceful uses to weapons.
LBJ made it a priority to support our hopes with the ratifying of the UN's non-proliferation resolution.
In the name of our common humanity, let us ensure our high destiny on earth, the ultimate self-interest of mankind.
The opposing mindset soon obtains leadership.
This is Jack Anderson. President Nixon has dusted off contingency plans to use nuclear weapons in Vietnam in case the American troops should be threatened by the North Vietnamese invasion. Plans have been kept up to date in secret targeting rooms in Hawaii. We even named one of the target experts, Sergeant James Walkley, who offered to testify before Congress. The plan that interests the president is the use of neutron bombs. These are low-yield nuclear devices without their uranium jackets. The explosive force sends out a radiation burst that will kill all living things within the area. Like a death ray, will penetrate tanks, pillboxes, and shelters.
As his administration secretly supports another obtaining nuclear weapons. Karen Silkwood, a young chemical technician working in the Kerr-McGee plutonium plant, Oklahoma, concerned with workers' safety, discovers missing weapons-grade plutonium, suspected of being shipped to Israel for their emerging weapons program. Someone considers her dangerous. She is murdered by those who know. Her evidence is stolen from her car as she lays dying. A younger Vice President Nixon speaking to his support base.
We will negotiate from strength, not from weakness. In the modern world, military strength means above all mastery of nuclear weapons. Those in the United States who sincerely believe that we should give consideration to stopping further tests of the hydrogen bomb. This kind of thinking, in my opinion, is not only wrong and naive, but it is dangerous to our national security.
And who was listening most carefully? This reasoning still echoes with all who want to be nuclear nations. Perhaps Chairman Mao Zedong expressed most simply the reasoning of many nationalists around the world when stating why China went nuclear. Quote, "It's absolutely impermissible for a couple of countries to brandish their nuclear weapons, issuing orders as self-ordained nuclear overlords, while the rest of us are expected to kneel and obey as if nuclear slaves." Shortly after this statement, China exploded its first nuclear weapon. India was having constant border battles with China. Pakistan, constant border battles with India. Soviet Union helps China, China helps North Korea, helps Pakistan, US helps Israel. All now full of the same divisive nationalistic nuclear pride as us, keeping the antagonistic lethal cycle spiraling. But from the start, higher perspectives always strove to bring us out of the narrow, dark Cold War mentality. Let's go back and listen to our President Eisenhower, who was often at odds with his right-wing Vice President Nixon.
Stand ready to engage with any and all others in joint effort to remove the causes of mutual fear and distrust among nations, so as to make possible drastic reduction of armaments.
On a very separate path from Eisenhower, Nixon verbalizes the continuing challenge faced by all those who have tried to halt nuclear arms, and champions verification above all else.
Nor will we enter into any agreements to disarm unless we have a system of inspection and control that is completely foolproof. Until we have this, we shall keep the military, political, and economic strength needed to deter any aggressor.
Yes, verification, of course, is also a lot of crap. That's where they always get hung up. It's just a way of delaying things. Having the things declared illegal is actually valuable, even when it's not verified. Now, if we had a treaty outlawing nuclear weapons, which is what I'd like to have, doesn't mean that they'd all disappear. I'm sure the Israelis would keep some, even if they signed the treaty. Probably the Iranians would keep some, but still they would be underground and hidden away. And meanwhile, we get rid of ours, which are really the most dangerous of all, because we have much more, and we're not so good at keeping secrets. And anyway, so I think we'd be far better off with the treaty, even if it's not verifiable, which it probably isn't.
Rather than uninformed, put the word misguided people who contend that our line is too hard and that we should soften it. It is time that we realize that well-intentioned but mistaken men can be even more dangerous than admitted communists.
Eleanor stood up to broaden such points of view promoted by the industries.
Russia cannot want to be destroyed any more than we do. The risk from fallout is very great. We might destroy the human race. At present, we have never been able to agree as to what proper inspection could be, and therefore we have never been able to take a step forward in the framework of the disarmament conference. It seems to me that we can afford to take the risk of stopping hydrogen bombs. It will give greater assurance to the peoples of the world, and it will be the first step forward. I believe it is the thing for us to do.
I say trust the people, trust their good sense, their decency. It is time to take this government away from men who only know how to count. Where the free peoples of the world have turned to us for wisdom and leadership, all we have offered is a contradictory clatter of boasts and threats, be dedicated to establishing a workable, realistic partnership between nations in which disputes are settled by conciliation, not violence, and in which the weapons of death are limited.
I'm for Adlai Stevenson because he offers the best opportunity for regaining what we've lost in the world in the last few years. We have lost friends, and we need friends. We need training for world thinking. And I am hopeful that if we elect Adlai Stevenson, we will gain friends because we will have a man who looks at the world picture with knowledge and with understanding of their problems as well as our own.
Failing to try to understand others' problems is one of the roots of today's terrorism. In the same time, citizens continue to offer their lives for us. In 1958, the brave crew of the Golden Rule set sail twice to try to halt our constant testing by directly entering our Pacific testing areas. At first, they were turned back and detained. The second time, they were arrested. The Vets for Peace have recently resurrected the Golden Rule to sail the world and once again inform us. A year and a half after this crew offering their ultimate sacrifices, others continue forward on our opposite coast. Excerpts of a 1960 documentary on one action of civil disobedience.
The Polaris is triggered to hurl the warhead to whatever target the military mind in its wisdom selects. Its 16 warheads combine the might of all the explosives of World War II. The Committee for Nonviolent Action, their aim was to board the Polaris subs in living protest against the mechanisms of massive annihilation, to remain there as witnesses for peace as long as humanly possible. Swimmers were pursued through the icy cold waters. Dick Zink climbed up the tailfin, a lone exponent of peace on the Navy's deadliest weapon. Each embraced a risk to the degree his conscience demanded or his circumstances allowed. This insistence of physical presence under the propellered stern of the nuclear submarine to contrast the human creature with the death machine, and thus alert all people to avert the peril. The civil disobedience fulfilled their task with open hearts and without loss of sympathy for the guards, whose job it was to reject them. Supporting actions included appeals to the workmen. The nonviolent challenge to violence goes on.
A soon newly elected John Kennedy had long gained a deep respect for Mrs. Roosevelt and welcomed Adlai Stevenson to be his ambassador.
No solid justification for exploding this monstrous and unnecessary weapon. They have been wholly unmoved by the dangers of radioactive fallout to the human race. The world has taken a great leap backward, with unpredictable consequences for the health and the security of the human race. I am personally deeply saddened. Since 1956, I have constantly urged that an agreement to stop the further development of nuclear weapons must be concluded as a first step toward controlled reduction of all armaments. Our goal is disarmament, however, and we will persist. We will keep on working at it. The plight of mankind demands of us no less. Thank you.
The citizens of our allies across the ocean concur. Disarmament is impossible without international security. We will not halt the arms race by pretending we will just throw arms away, for we cannot agree on parity. We can only be effective if we focus on a positive concept. International security is a positive concept. Ambassador Rosides felt at home with President Kennedy, saying he was of like mind and knew that he was moving swiftly against hardliners toward nuclear disarmament and true security. Kennedy requested to meet again. The ambassador remained heartbroken, recalling his great encouragement, adding his brother Robert would have picked up the torch. If our greatest obstacle is distrust, distrust can change with small human efforts. The sense of justice is inherent in the spirit of man. It is not the power of weapons, but the power of this spirit that can save the world.
Welded together in what should be a continued cooperation for world peace, all those who had fought against oppression. By all who have sacrificed themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, we meet here in an hour of grief and challenge. Dag Hammarskjöld is dead. His tragedy is deep in our hearts, but the tasks for which he died are at the top of our agenda. A noble servant of peace is gone, but the quest for peace lies before us.
The nuclear weapon issue was an albatross for him. Dag focused on what he could do, a lifetime protecting not only superpowers from themselves, but all the smaller, newly emerging countries. Control over the uranium for our weapons remained dirty business. Not only untold thousands die from handling it, but anyone getting in the way of its use is eliminated. Where is the best source of the uranium used in these bombs? The purest source, used for Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the West's vast nuclear arsenal. The mining company, along with its customers, did not wish any interference to their highly profitable, secretive, deadly resource. The new democratically elected Congo, with its brave Irish peacekeepers, was threatened with uprisings. Dag Hammarskjöld was again personally going to help face and mediate. Mediation or compromise was obviously not welcomed by the powers that be, and the General Secretary and his colleagues were murdered just miles from their destination and these uranium mines.
Unconditional war can no longer lead to unconditional victory. It can no longer serve to settle disputes. It can no longer concern the great powers alone. For a nuclear disaster spread by winds and water and fear could well engulf the great and the small, the rich and the poor, the committed and the uncommitted alike. Mankind must put an end to war. So let us here resolve that Dag Hammarskjöld did not live or die in vain. Let us call a truce to terror. Let us invoke the blessings of peace. And as we build an international capacity to keep peace, let us join in dismantling the national capacity to wage war. This will require new strength and new roles. The mere existence of modern weapons, 10 million times more powerful than any that the world has ever seen, and only minutes away from any target on Earth, is a source of horror and discord and distrust. Men no longer maintain that disarmament must await the settlement of all disputes, and man may no longer pretend that the quest for disarmament is a sign of weakness. For in a spiraling arms race, a nation's security may be shrinking, even as its arms increase. For 15 years, this organization has sought the reduction and destruction of arms. Now that goal is no longer a dream. It is a practical matter of life or death. The risks inherent in disarmament pale in comparison to the risks inherent in an unlimited arms race. Recognizing that this is no longer a Soviet problem or an American problem, but a human problem.
President Kennedy was among many whose hopes were assassinated by a military right. With anti-nuclear rallies banned in Greece, Dr. Grigoris Lambrakis did a one-man anti-nuclear walk from Marathon to Athens and was assassinated for it shortly after by those of the right wing. In his name, hundreds of thousands disregarded the ban and gathered to march against the weapons. If we can't know who killed Kennedy, we can see the opposing forces that killed his hope, his goals, his life vision. Specifically, his planned actions toward nuclear disarmament.
The structure alone for one soft emplacement contains 129,000 tons of steel and concrete, nails and lumber.
Enough concrete will have been poured to build another Hoover Dam. Enough earth will have been moved to build a levee along the entire length of the Mississippi, 5 feet high and 10 feet wide. Enough steel to build 1 million automobiles. The biggest, the most involved, the most complex construction project in the history of our nation. Titan intercontinental ballistic missile deployed in underground silos that will withstand all but a direct nuclear hit.
All of us who share the construction of missile site responsibility dedicate ourselves to finishing these sites in harmony and with the greatest possible speed and economy.
Why end the Kennedys' momentum for us? We know, especially in JFK's last year, that he was heading strongly against the winds and industry of nuclear armament, his wanting to share technologies for a joint mission to the moon and beyond. Contradicting those so focused on fighting enemies, he was arranging to personally go to Moscow.
Every part that goes into these missiles and launchers has a life and death significance more vital than any battle line in history.
I'm confident that the Commission will continue to get the cooperation of all our workers, our labor unions, and our management officials in making sure that our missile programs go forward uninterrupted.
For never before have the destinies of so many hundreds of millions of people depended on the timely activation of a weapon.
Declaring our destinies depend on these weapons? How else to dedicate our trillions to buy the world's highest educated for them still depends on us believing this. Kennedy no longer believed it. How can we anymore?
The total complex of this largest military construction program in history is spread across the nation in 16 states, from California and the state of Washington on the West Coast to Plattsburgh Air Force Base in upstate New York. Closely coordinated, 25 major contractors employing more than 100,000 men and women, 400 subcontractors, more than 400,000 vendors and suppliers are working under the most extreme management pressures it is possible to exert to provide a gargantuan ballistic force.
Unions must work with unions and crafts with crafts in ways that have never been needed before.
In the interest of national security. The AFL-CIO and all its departments and affiliated unions support that order without reservation. We pledge our full cooperation to assure uninterrupted work at all missile sites.
We had a student protest in Washington in 1962. We had maybe 4,000 kids. I was at the church, which is the command center. The students had come to check with me, asked what they should do. They said that the president had sent out a butler with coffee and donuts, and should they accept it? The president is really saying, I need help. When does the president ever send out coffee and donuts to a picket line? Kennedy was really trapped by the Cold War, and I think needed this kind of action to help him. So I said, by all means, take the coffee and donuts.
The United Nations 18th General Assembly, which opened in an unusually hopeful atmosphere, here's a message of interplanetary importance from President Kennedy, who arrives with Ambassador Adlai Stevenson.
Why pick as your ambassador a well-known champion of nuclear disarmament? Public support financing this highest ramped-up nuclear missile production period required the corresponding political rhetoric and fear of the arch-enemy, the communist world. Imagine sharing missile technology? On this day, he will shock and madden all military industrialists. 2 months later, he'll be dead.
Makes a startling proposal.
Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity, in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts, a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty, By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies, and declared that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expeditions, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, and expenditure?
For some, his words never existed.
The Polaris submarine construction program approached completion. Recent months have been marked by numerous launchings and commissionings. Can we say mission accomplished? Become complacent with the assurance there's a mighty nuclear deterrent at work to maintain our security? The truth is, no modern weapon system can contribute to our security without a continuing expenditure of human energy to man it, to maintain it, and to modify and develop it to meet changing requirements. The job of keeping it ready as an ever-effective deterrent, is a story that never ends.
Instead of pushing a Cold War, he was planning to meet Khrushchev again in Moscow. Instead of armament industries flooding the Third World factions with weapons to resolve disputes, he knew how to prevent war and hatred by having unarmed youth learn other languages and cultures, and to teach and train without the idea of profit in areas of greatest human need. These noble goals and ideas were murdered. The road to ridding ourselves of missiles is guided by steps of building genuine trust.
At President Kennedy's news conference in Washington, the chief executive announces the creation of a Peace Corps to help the developing countries of the world.
To help foreign countries meet their urgent needs for skilled manpower. It will not be easy. None of the men and women will be paid a salary. They will live at the same level as the citizens of the country which they're sent to, doing the same work, eating the same food, speaking the same language. We're going to put particular emphasis on those men and women who have skills in teaching, agriculture, and in health. In the last few months, more applications for the Peace Corps have come to us than have come for positions in all the rest of the United States government put together. It's not designed as a weapon of propaganda. It's not designed as a tool in the Cold War. It is a genuine effort. Young people in this country are anxious to hold out their hands to people in other worlds. They will learn as much as they will teach. I hope that from it will come renewed understanding by people all over the world of a common desire for peace. I hope out of it will come a better life for all mankind.
I'm getting rather suspicious over here that despite your instructions that some of our friends over in the Central Intelligence Agency, they're trying to stick fellas into the Peace Corps. We've got a group in training now that looks suspicious, but I sure in hell want those
you call Dick Helms, just say to him, you talk to me, and I don't want anybody in there. Okay. And if they are there, let's get them out now. We're very, very anxious that there be no, we don't want to discredit this whole idea.
Okay, fine.
And Christ, they're not going to find out that much intelligence.
The president our military and right wing are proud of for signing off on the bomb spent his last years supporting Kennedy going to Moscow, disarmament causes, and a ban on these weapons.
How are you?
I'm all right. I want to congratulate you on that treaty.
Maybe it's going to help.
I do. I'm writing you a letter, but I'm in complete agreement. Congratulating you on getting that thing done. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Mr. President. That's very generous.
I'm going to the St. Louis tomorrow.
Yeah?
For the American Legion Convention.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good...
I can't imagine a better. That'd be very helpful.
Well, I want to do it the way you want it. I want to do whatever will be helpful to you.
Thank you very much.
I'll be glad to do it.
The monk Thomas Merton was fiercely criticized for anti-nuclear weapon writings in his Cold War letters of 1962, which church authorities then forbade to be published. He elucidated, quote, "People do not feel at all threatened by the bomb, but they feel terribly threatened by some student carrying a placard. Prophetically, Merton wrote President Kennedy that he was concerned that he could be assassinated if he continued to push back on the missile industry. Without upholding religion, we shine the light on all leaders for humanity. There were many ready to pounce on any sign of our first Irish Catholic president being influenced by a pope, especially one who was so clearly outspoken against the race of nuclear weapons and the business of militarism in general. Pope John saw it as a great weakness, not strength, hence a quiet sending of Vice President Johnson. In spring 1963, both the Pope and JFK would come out with major speeches and works against these weapons. Both would be dead within months. Condemnations, always condemnations. There is another way. If you don't wish to show weakness, then talk to one another. Dialogue with your perceived enemies. Learn to understand one another. Focus on what unites us as humans, not what divides us. Remind our children of their duty to take an active part in public life and to contribute toward the attainment of the common good of the entire human family. We are deeply distressed to see the enormous stocks of armaments manufactured. This policy involves a vast outlay of intellectual and material resources, with the result that the people are saddled with a great debt, while other countries lack the help they need for their economic and social development. If one country increases its military strength, others are immediately roused to augment their own. If one country is equipped with atomic weapons, others consider themselves then justified in producing them. The arms race needs to cease, nuclear weapons banned. We must encourage general disarmament. May all peoples welcome each other into their hearts as brothers and sisters.
Translation of cupiditas into caritas, or self-centered love into a outgoing, other-centered love.
Thomas Merton highly praised both the Pope's call against the arms race and Kennedy's momentous American University speech in '63. In turn, they both were encouraged by Merton, one of the world's greatest spiritual thinkers.
The man who depends on brute power, he's in a brutal position. He's not in a strong position. The nation that shows power is the nation that shows restraint. If you can come out and make a statement like that, you're putting yourself in a stronger position, not a weaker position. If you begin to hold that it is legitimate to launch a preemptive strike, see, which means you hit first without letting them know and smash everything, to argue that that comes under the heading of defense seems to me to be pushing things pretty far. And that's what some of these people are arguing. That's an awful big order for Catholic morality.
It's now estimated that the U.S. has got 30 tons of TNT for every living human being on the face of the earth. We've obviously got enough. The Russians equivalently, just looking at it from the hard-headed war-making standpoint, it's to the interests of both the U.S. and Russia not to test anymore, because the cookies who are going to be profiting by it are going to be people like the Chinese and the French who haven't got as much as we've got and who want to get more. This fallout is a real problem. See, there's very little news given out about fallout. We get more Russian fallout than we get American. And the people that get the fallout in the South Pacific are my aunt in New Zealand and South Sea Islanders and so forth. But we get the Russian fallout. They test within the Arctic Circle. And this sort of comes floating over the pole, and it comes down right about here. The people on the Scientific American are no fools. They know what they're talking about. This is straight stuff.
Johnson said, you have to create pressures on me. I need more demonstrations. You have to create a situation that will allow me to act or force me to act. And I think that's the dialectical relationship between movements and political leaders that we don't always see. And that, yes, we do need to press Obama very much.
What's the sense of giving our great American a national holiday to shop and have military parades if we completely ignore his direction?
Communism will never be defeated by the use of atomic bombs and nuclear weapons. Let us not join those who shout war and through their misguided passions. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. The Americans are forcing even their friends into becoming their enemies. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered.
The most ignored, unappreciated, and greatly disrespected of all vets are those who came back and dared to stand up to tell us what our media wasn't. They never let us down and endure memory of insult. To this day, we thank them for their strength of courage, their patriotism, from the battlefield to our home.
What has to be 1 million people. I thought I would welcome 1 million to beat the press to its usual underestimation.
Thank you, brothers and sisters, and my children all. I love you.
The President of the United States said nothing you young kids would do would have any effect on him. Many of us might have to go to jail. Many of us have been to jail. We go on record today to say to tyrants all over the world that in the not too distant future, we're gonna see to it there will be no more war. You understand why they had to make the threats that there was going to be violence? Because you young folks have come to the nation's capital today using the greatest weapon ever been used in the history of the world. A pure moral dedication will break the back of the most vicious tyrant, and that's what you have today. You are strong enough to end the war in Vietnam. You proved with unity you're strong enough to break the back of a racist system. You're strong enough to wipe out poverty, and you've also proved that you are strong enough to do away with the military-industrial complex.
But those who write the laws and direct the affairs of government have used the awesome power of this society more irresponsibly and more immorally than any of the young.
Let's step back a few years. Republican Senator Goldwater told the press that President Johnson was about to use the nuclear bomb on the Vietnamese, but couldn't be trusted to tell the American people. Whereas if he were elected president, he would use it when needed, be honest and upfront about it.
I ordinarily ignore irresponsible charges. Right. But when they go to talking about dropping nuclear weapons, that's something that frightens the world. And mothers and everything else, they keep loud. We got to blow the whistle on that stuff. Right.
People ask me, why is a children's doctor working for the election
because I think we owe our children, above all else, a peaceful world to grow up in. Barry Goldwater's ideas of how a president should act fill me with alarm. He thinks that an army commander in the field should be allowed to unleash nuclear weapons if he wishes to. He thinks that it was all a mistake for President Kennedy to secure the test ban treaty. I hope for your children's sake that you will vote for President Johnson.
The president's speechwriter advisor, perhaps America's greatest journalist to this day.
Better get for me tomorrow the Republicans that are the best prospects.
All right. All right, I'll have that for you. I'm going to call the president of the Chamber of Commerce. He made a good speech last week. He urged businessmen to get into the war on poverty, bring all of his people from all over the country who are the legislative finesse artists, to use Doherty's language, and ask him to stay here for 2 days and do nothing but work on poverty.
All right, call me as soon as you know, because I want to see who I can talk to.
All right, sir.
What about my speech at Syracuse?
It's coming along pretty good. It's a good speech. It's not ready for you to have yet, but it will be during the night. Bundy and Goodwin and I met for an hour a day at lunch on it.
What's the lead on it?
The lead is reasserting civilian control over nuclear weapons.
Okay, that's good. All right.
Reasserting civilian control over nuclear weapons.
This would echo the call of Einstein's committee, combining with it our true security, good jobs to fight poverty. But within a few hours, such a pivotal presidential speech is sabotaged and subverted. Moyer's draft is scratched. New speechwriters are brought in. President Johnson will mention nothing about these weapons nor poverty. Misleading information was rushed to his desk concerning being attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. Most tragically for the people of our country, millions of Vietnamese, he addresses the nation to commit us to the business of armaments. War in Vietnam.
Mr. President? Yes, sir.
This is General Wheeler.
Yes, sir.
General Wheeler advises clearly to LBJ not to talk to our media about nuclear weapon matters. It's what the world's citizens have been up against from all military industries.
One statement should be made that the use of forces and weapons is a matter for the president to decide at the time in the light of the situation, and that you will have nothing further to say about this matter. We should just refuse to talk about it. We should just refuse to talk about it.
Thankfully, he does talk about it.
The Republicans remember that they've always been elected by trying to scare the people. Their platform this year is made up of one word: fear.
I said I was ready when I came in here, and I reduced my nuclear stockpile and our production, and I closed down some reactors. And Khrushchev did the same thing, but when you had a change over there, all at once things froze up. Now, I've never said one unkind word about the Soviet Union or any of their leaders. I told him, well, I want to visit your country. I want all your people to come here. I wish Mr. Kosygin come see us. I wish Mr. Brezhnev. I want all of our people. I want our artists, our musicians, our politicians, our businessmen. I want them to know your people. I'm not afraid of you, and I don't think you ought to be afraid of me. And I think that we're the two powers in the world. There's no reason why we ought to keep all the world feeling that we're going to blow it up, because I'm not going to. I don't think you're going to. I'm not afraid of you, and I don't see any reason in the world why you ought to be afraid of me. I want to know you better, and I want to exchange goods with you, and I want to exchange scholars with you, and I want to exchange people with you, and I want to see you get along and do well. I think you want to do the same thing.
The great Russian scientist Andrei Sakharov designed the largest bomb ever exploded on the Earth. Detonated in 1961, buildings 70 miles away collapsed. This one explosion that shook and polluted the Earth equaled 3,125 Hiroshimas. Sakharov then awakened to become the leading dissident against the Soviet military complex and his own nuclear invention. For years, I found myself caught up in the routine of a world of military designers and inventors, special institutes, pilot plants, and proving grounds. Every day I saw the huge material and intellectual resources of thousands of people being poured into the creation of a means of total destruction of human civilization. I noticed that the control levers were in the hands of people who, though talented, were cynical. I got an increasingly clearer picture of the collective might of the military-industrial complex and of its unprincipled leaders, blind to everything except their job. Let's honor Sakharov's last words, recorded just hours before his sudden, unexpected death. Quote, "I hope that mankind will terminate this critical period of history when we competed in inventing weapons of mass destruction." Carl Sagan, internationally renowned astrophysicist and an enthusiastic conveyor of science, space travel, and research for humanity, surrendered both his commercial success and his top-secret clearance with the military industries. His last episode of Cosmos puts forth his concern of a future nuclear holocaust. He was arrested climbing the Nevada test site fence, stating clearly, the unfeasible missile defense or Star Wars would only divert vast public money and greatly escalate the nuclear arms race. They finally shut down this highly polluting plutonium weapons facility in Colorado, with the extent of contamination still withheld. In numbers further than the eye can see, protesting Washington State subbases. They call it the nuclear corridor. 1,000 missile silos scattered over many thousands of square miles of our land. In each cluster here there are hundreds. Each red dot represents from a couple to 15 missile silos.
You have to get out there to appreciate the size, the scope of this vast program. It includes the expenditure of billions of dollars. Over 100,000 contractor employees at the missile sites have worked more than 50 million man-days since ground was first broken. A cross-section of industry must mingle with a cross-section of skills in a way not equaled in any previous undertaking.
Behind the fencing and up close, the small hatch doors are barely visible.
Launcher doors weighing 40 tons each.
What lies beneath? These and hundreds of launch control centers, also just seemingly a small outdoor structure, have miles of apparatus unseen deep in earth.
A control center has nearly 4,000 miles of electrical circuitry.
Meanwhile, through the decades, hundreds of groups of brave, dedicated citizens have continued practicing an aware presence, witnessing so we may be informed, gathering in prayer, and keeping vigilance with the hopes others of us might awake someday. With the Vietnam War over, the War Resisters League organized the Continental Walk for Disarmament and Social Justice. It called for the shifting of economic priorities away from militarism and toward meeting domestic and global human needs. They marched from California to our capital, covered 8,000 miles over 10 months through 34 states. Some were arrested on charges of walking in the roadway. On the final day in October, 700 reached the Pentagon. 53 were arrested for failing to disperse. The then U.S. President Gerald Ford refused the request to meet and made a speech the next day denouncing all those who urged cutting nuclear weapon expenditures. Joining in organizing was the Fellowship of Reconciliation, the American Friends Service Committee, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Catholic Peace Fellowship, clergy and laity concerned, SANE, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. On Easter Sunday, Father Phil Berrigan and others disarmed 2 Tomahawk missiles at Norfolk Naval Base. He was arrested again, and while in prison he wrote, "The shameless and miserable failure of world institutions, governments, churches, media, campuses to expose nuclear lunacy, and to propose human alternatives. Clearly, the government took strenuous measures to prevent military personnel and all of us from knowing the truth about nuclear insanity. Truth and war are inimical. No war-making government can tolerate the luxury of an informed and critical public. I do not claim that anyone knows the whole truth, but what does one need to know? If these weapons are not immoral, evil, unjust, and anti-human, then nothing is. We must ponder the reality of 150 million tons of radioactive garbage in the stratosphere from testing, sifting into the air, water, and soil. We must scrutinize our willingness to pay for these hellish weapons. What does it cost us spiritually, while calling it the price of freedom?
The task is staggering in scope and complexity.
Each week, the workers of America, with industry and their government, are delivering at least one new missile site in defense of the free world. The Atlas is deployed operationally, ready for instant nuclear retaliation.
Its political cost? How many governments do Americans now have? The elected one, the commercial and financial one, the gumshoe one, and the secret team one. Watch the pharaohs choose between their people and the bomb. They will choose the bomb. In fact, they have done so already.
A launcher must be delivered and installed on schedule. The part, manufactured in Phoenix, Arizona, must align perfectly in the field near Salina, Kansas, with another part produced in San Diego, California.
We don't have to take the betrayal and poison and hostage-ship to the bomb. We can raise our voices, invest our bodies in a huge, resounding, unequivocal public no and a sacred yes to life. Several years earlier,
may we do something to prevent that which would cause nuclear ash.
In this trial reenactment, Father Dan Bergen of the Plowshares 8, they were tried and jailed for entering a General Electric plant and slightly damaging property, a nuclear warhead.
Property certainly refers to whatever enhances, nourishes, cherishes, builds human life or human community. Now, strangely, in this courtroom, you're going to hear that noble word applied to those horrors. These are the hammers that will break the world to bits. Those things have nothing to do with what is proper to human beings. They are anti-property. To take responsibility for these things, to call them by their right name, which is murder, death, genocide. These things belong to someone. They belong to us. They are ours. They do not belong in our world. We are going to be responsible for them. I would like to leave with you, friends and jurors, that great and noble word, which is our crime, responsibility.
And what else was going on that same year?
Inflation, unemployment, the cities, all very important issues, but they pale into insignificance in the life and duties of a president when compared with the control of nuclear weapons. That's the most important single issue in this campaign. I think habitually, Governor Reagan has advocated the injection of military forces into troubled areas. He advocates playing a trump card against the Soviet Union of a nuclear arms race and insisting upon nuclear superiority by our own nation as a predication for negotiation in the future.
We must have a consistent foreign policy, a strong America, and a strong economy. And then, as we build up our national security to restore our margin of safety, we at the same time try to restrain the Soviet buildup, which has been going forward at a rapid pace.
The adversarial relationship between ourselves and the Soviet Union is extremely dangerous and belligerent in its tone.
In this election especially, what was both the tone and the substance humanity was asking of its leaders, showing them the way. Can we imagine the bravery and personal cost? The people's tone leading up to this was consistently derided and marginalized by the then Governor Reagan.
Negotiations on their terms because Mr. Carter had canceled the B-1 bomber, delayed the MX, delayed the Trident submarine, delayed the cruise missile, shut down the Minuteman missile production line, and whatever other things that might have been done. The Soviet Union sat at the table knowing that we had gone forward with unilateral concessions without any reciprocation from them whatsoever.
There is a disturbing pattern in the attitude of Governor Reagan. He has never supported any of those arms control agreements. The limited test ban, SALT I, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, nor the Vladivostok treaty. When a man who hopes to be president says, take this treaty, discard it, do not vote, do not debate, that is a very dangerous and disturbing thing.
Sunrise on Earth. Morning in America was Governor Reagan's campaign slogan. He won handily, and indeed President Carter's direction was reversed. Here's the dawn America got.
Preserving the peace requires more than wishful thinking and vague good intentions. To continue the strategic modernization program which I announced in October of 1981, the need remains for improvements in the command, control, and communications of our strategic forces, and continuation of our bomber, submarine, and cruise missile program. We should immediately proceed to develop and produce the Peacekeeper missile and deploy 100 in existing Minuteman silos and to move to a more stable ICBM structure. We can no longer afford to delay. The time to act is now.
Reagan took the presidency, and for the next several years, both our bravado and our nuclear weapons producers would get a green light. Until someone very unique arrives, turning the entire game plan on its head, Mikhail Gorbachev. It's fair to say there was genuine chemistry between these two, and despite surprising the hawks of both countries, and at least for the moment, buoyantly heartening citizens of the world, President Reagan's personal heart and mind began to open to new possibilities, and would agree with Gorbachev that abolition of these weapons could be in their grasp. Mikhail Gorbachev credited and thanked those who touched and influenced him, acknowledging publicly all the movements and those who sacrificed, who stood up to stop this madness. We'll return to these two soon. Gorbachev was not impressed with our missiles, with a Reagan administration who only viewed protests as weakness and somehow anti-American. Let's take in the recognition Gorbachev gave to what influenced him the most. This human, this rare world leader, as he gave genuine gratitude to those around the world who stood up and sacrificed for good reason. Well over 1 million people in this one city on this one day. No matter how forgotten, minuscule, or unthanked one's efforts and life seems, the great arc of human history is indebted to you and all those he praised. Thank you. And let us remember again these two who knew well this was the way forward. And another who was also interrupted as he was laying the groundwork needed so such weapons would never be necessary, facilitating enemies into allies.
Always seeking to build friendships with other nations, large and small, for powerful countries to adopt a principle of preventive war may well set an example that can have catastrophic consequences. There are others who have acted with great personal courage. None has provided more vivid reminders of the dangers.
I come knowing that our aspirations and goals are one.
I found you a man of courage and vision. You listen only to the dictates of your conscience. My dear friend, President Carter.
Close friends, Anwar Sadat and Yitzhak Rabin, who gave their lives for the cause of peace. As a citizen of a troubled world who finds hope in a growing consensus that the generally accepted goals of society are peace, freedom, human rights, environmental equality, the alleviation of suffering, and the rule of law.
Let us have three of us together.
Very good.
Let's pray.
I'm so proud of both of you. God bless you both.
Gorbachev courageously returns us to trust building.
The winter of our discontent may one day come to an end. The process, now underway all over the world, of rethinking the realities of the nuclear and space age. It must now be clear to all that the problems of today's world will not be solved through old approaches. The goal we're setting today is to build a nuclear-free world. The road leading to it is difficult and thorny, but with new thinking, it is attainable. So I address these words of congratulation to the Soviet and American people. I want to emphasize that this is the fruit of the efforts not only of us both, but also all public movements whose effort and contribution rightfully made them party to this historic event.
The culminating hope was tragically dashed when hardliners on both sides entrenched positions on Star Wars SDI, finding another perfect excuse to push the business of proliferation.
I made it clear that our SDI program will continue, and that when we have a defense ready to deploy, we will do so. I refuse Soviet demands that we trade away SDI. Your overwhelming support made it clear to the Soviet leaders that the American people prefer no deal to a bad deal and will back their president on matters of national security.
Here are just a handful, but all across America, in large cities and small towns, citizens and representatives took the great efforts, worked hard to officially, legally write, vote on, and pass city council and statewide resolutions, test ban declarations, creating nuclear-free zones, knowing the weapons' irrevocable effects, proclaiming discontinuing their development. Our cities decried the great economic costs needed in their cities and society going to an arms race.
Have discussions and talk about why we're not having health care for everybody, and why they're trying to corporatize schools, why we have so many homeless people.
Mayors for Peace has over 5,700 mayors and rising from 157 countries who work together transcending borders to proclaim the abolition of all nuclear weapons, to redirect these vast resources towards supporting the vital priorities they face, education, housing, arts, environmental protection, cultural development, and peaceful trade, among others. Ask your mayor to join them. And why not a school teacher's view?
It's devastating. And the idea that something as negative as that in our society could even be allowed to exist at this point is terrible to me. I mean, I think somehow our society could get to the point where we don't need to have those kinds of weapons available to anyone. Like a horror science fiction film, it definitely, in some kind of conceptual way, also robs us of a future. What sense does that make? What sense does that make?
I have several seniors in high school who are scared to death. They're just trying to figure out who they are and what they want to stand for. Where is your moral compass? The message that they're getting is that there is no real right and wrong. Good and evil depends on the circumstance. Teens don't want our country to stand for this whole macho bullies of the world. They definitely do not want that.
Only now are children being taught that the environment is very precious and you have to live in a sustainable way.
To project future and to talk about future is very difficult. People need to eat. There's so much that could be done to just develop humanity.
Education is the answer as far as nukes too. We are very young as a race compared to everything else on this ancient planet, and maybe we'll actually be an educated race. We just got to hang in there. And people like the activists are really important because there has to be a consciousness that nukes are really one of the most dangerous things on the planet.
If we're going to really have a society that's holistic and our children are educated properly and we can truly look at a future that has some possibilities and is truly hopeful, the amount of money that's spent in the production, the maintenance, for a fraction of what we pay to maintain the industry of war, we could develop technology that would, first of all, propel us into an environmentally sound existence.
Back to the political timeline. The Dukakis campaign stressed and graphed how we were spending too much on defense and not enough on the other sectors vital to society. Vice President Bush won handily in 1988, largely by repeating that Governor Dukakis was weak on defense, a danger to the country. He stated that we could survive and win a nuclear war.
We've sent up the levels of funding, and when it is deployable, I will deploy it. That's my position on SDI, and it's never wavered a bit. Peace through strength works. And so this is where I have a big difference.
Education and housing and healthcare and economic development and job training and the environment. Now, all of these things are going to have to be addressed. And we are not going to spend the billions and trillions that Mr. Bush wants to spend on Star Wars. We're not going to spend billions on MXs on railroad cars, which is a weapon system we don't need, can't afford, and won't help our defense posture.
Let's not be naive in dealing with the Soviets. Please do not go back to the days when the military was as weak as they could be.
The Vice President's mathematics just doesn't add up.
Which will bring down the level of nuclear armament, will build a more stable and a more peaceful world, and we can do so while making choices here at home. Let's not forget that our national security and our economic security go hand in hand. We cannot be strong militarily when we're teeter-tottering on top of a mountain of debt which has been created in the past 8 years.
We can't simply say, we've got enough nuclear weapons, let's freeze. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. Shake hands around the world, down by the riverside and study war no more. I am gonna study war no more. I'm gonna study war no
And thousands of unheralded individual sacrifices as this one brave life spared by international attention. Israeli nuclear technician Mordecai Vanunu reveals proof of the existence of Israel's secret nuclear weapons program, denied still today, and is put into solitary confinement for 11 years, then prison and extremely strict house arrest since. The concerned citizen stated, "I'm neither a traitor nor a spy. I only wanted the world to know what was happening." In 1984, Senate candidate John Kerry contacts Frances Crowe about her endorsement, writing, "As you know, I have made the issue of the freeze and an end to the arms race the central issue of my campaign." Now, 30 years later, with the perfect opportunity as Secretary of State, did he forget to both honor the advocacy of Frances Crowe and the millions of citizens who've sacrificed themselves for the world?
When I was in Europe trying to convince European public opinion that we ought to go forward with the deployment of the INF weapons, and thank God the freeze people were not heard. They were wrong. They were wrong. And the result is we deployed, and the Soviets kept deploying, and then we negotiated from strength.
Strength must now stop being equated with mass murder of innocents, anywhere, anytime.
We have a race. Where's the finishing line? When does it end? You know what I'm saying?
We have 13,000 strategic nuclear warheads right now on land, on sea, and in the air, enough to blow up the Soviet Union 40 times over. They have about 12,000. So we've got to move forward with those negotiations.
And how do you deter nuclear attack without modernizing our nuclear forces when the Soviets are modernizing?
To continue to commit billions to this system makes no sense at all. We've had enough of that, ladies and gentlemen.
But we cannot continue to live on a credit card, tell the American people that we're going to build all of these systems and at the same time invest in important things here at home and be serious about building a strong and good America.
We don't tell the people. 25 years later, we just spend a lot more for yet more new nuclear weapon facilities. By the early 1990s, no other than Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney would stealthily issue the secret nuclear weapons policy, ordering the Pentagon to switch our 45-year focus from the Soviet Union and prepare for nuclear strikes anywhere, everywhere, against any country in the world. Our new policy would be called Global Strike, and it meant just that. For millions of us wondering, what happened to the great benefits of ending the Cold War? The deserved dividends to go to the great priorities for our planet and humanity, a cause millions of citizens gave their hearts and bodies to.
Mr. President, esteemed citizens of the United States, we are grateful for your hospitality, and we wish success, well-being, and peace to all Americans. Thank you.
Here's the answer. The fruits of their noble efforts largely went right to an ever-hungry military nuclear congressional industrial complex. They did not deceive us, but others did, and we became a complacent people. This policy naturally required further developing increasingly secret, unrestrained, unaccountable, undemocratic institutions within a government, claiming within this circle that supremacy was patriotic. Global Strike would revive, again, the reckless and irresponsible concept that nuclear war was survivable, winnable, and we were going to win it. A decade later, in September 2002, it's Dick Cheney again, spreading what we now know to be a false claim that Iraq's Saddam Hussein indeed had reconstituted his nuclear weapons program, showing the world manufactured proof. Disregarded by the Bush and Blair administrations before their Iraq invasion, it was Hans Blix of Sweden who led the UN Commission there, who verified for the world that there were no nuclear weapons nor active programs. This planted fear convinced the nation to commence the longest war in our nation's history, now sold as unending war, securing for the war industry another reason to renew our nukes and all their facilities.
I think we're talking out of both sides of our mouth about nuclear weapons and the future of the planet. Threats. That path is not a path that will ever lead to peace, because its method is of war.
Jonathan Schell perhaps wrote one of our most insightful, intelligent books on knowing the underbelly of our nuclear weapon world. detailing some of the mystery of why disarmament did not naturally follow with the end of the Cold War as it was to, and how we instead got the opposite, with layers of concealment and confusion. Adding, the most important documents have been classified. In the documents we do have, the changes are couched in strategic jargon so vague, euphemistic, and abstract that it repels ordinary understanding. He would write clearly, "Empire is founded on the unremitting threat of force and the use of force. Abolition is founded on the principle of cooperation, a principle commonly understood and lived by most humanity."
This is Charlotte, my brand new grandchild, 6 months old. Sweet as could be. She's the 9th generation here on this farm. This is the reason that we love this farm and take such good care of it and keep it organic and fertile, and because to take care of the earth is taking care of people, passing it on, the hope, the dreams. That's why it's so important that everything we do is about caring for the earth. So when we think about destruction, it just seems like, well, what's that about? What does that have to do with people and children and grandchildren, right? What's destruction about? Well, that doesn't work. To be able to nurture, feeding, there's so much beauty in that.
John LaForge of Nukewatch took this photo of our majestic American eagle juxtaposed here soaring over an invasive silo. He was arrested yet again recently, along with, among others, David McReynolds, Ed Hendeman, Bud Courtney, Dorothy Day's granddaughter Martha Hennessy. From prison, John wrote, "Nuclear nations daily violate international treaty law using the theatrical hoax of deterrence. As the world came to its senses to ban nerve gas, landmines, cluster bombs, chemical and biological weapons, we will win-win eventually, as nuclear warheads do far more harm than all of these combined." Why they've put their lives on the line. Long before us, a great Marine hero, General Smedley Butler of World War I, spoke clearly about the disastrous connection of going to war to Wall Street profiteering. In early 1970, thousands of us gathered here to point out the dishonoring of our first president and our forefathers' intentions, with hundreds of bases and military interventions around the world, protecting our so-called interests. Armies were to protect our people, not shed their blood to own and protect the resources of the world for profit. We came to protest the irresponsibility of nuclear weapons, the racism and militarism of Vietnam, and the business on this street funding it all without reflection. 80 of us were sent to the hospital. Dozens of times, but here, almost a decade later, the same call rings out in the canyons of Wall Street. Over 3 decades after this, yet another call around the world to stand up to the money street and banks, responsible for prioritizing profits over human needs and the support of our earth and civilization. For those who prefer to trust military men, often called hawks, there are many examples of changed minds. Paul Nitze, awarded Legion of Merit honor by President Truman, became Secretary of our Navy, then Deputy Secretary of Defense. As President Reagan's chief arms control negotiator, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Our U.S. Military Academy awarded him with their prestigious Thayer Award. The destroyer named after him carries and guides missiles including those with nuclear warhead capabilities. And so intimate with all the details of nukes and about as high up in this authority chain as it gets. After listening to his conclusions, you simply can't say that being anti-nuke is naive or can't work. His op-ed titled, "A Threat Mostly to Ourselves." The fact is, I see no compelling reason why we should not unilaterally get rid of our nuclear weapons. To maintain them is costly and adds nothing to our security. What would our targets be? Many innocent people. Then asking himself why, after spending so many years negotiating with the Soviet Union, how could he say we no longer need them at all? Quote, "I know that the simplest and most direct answer to the problem of nuclear weapons has always been their complete elimination. It is the presence of nuclear weapons that threatens our existence."
The root of man's security lies not in his weaponry. In the end, it lies in his mind. And what the world requires, I think, then, in this 22nd year of our atomic age, is not a new race towards armament. What it requires today is a race towards reasonableness. And I think we'd better all run that race, not only we, the administrators, but we, the people.
Those retiring from our highest levels of government, including those of our military establishment, are countering and pushing back on a weapons industry out of step, out of any constructive purpose. Former Senator Sam Nunn, chair of the Armed Services, said the nuclear weapons states have a very hard time thinking about national security without nuclear weapons. The words are there. What is missing is execution. What is missing is presidential focus. What is missing is an organization that is held accountable. Most of the efforts disappear at the third and fourth levels of bureaucracies without the people at the top paying a lot of attention. That has to change. Nunn, along with Secretaries of State George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, and Secretary of Defense William Perry, joined together in recent years to write several op-eds in the Wall Street Journal, proclaiming the end of the Cold War made the doctrine of deterrence obsolete. Reliance on nuclear weapons for this purpose is becoming increasingly hazardous and decreasingly effective. Their vision shocked experts in the doctrine of deterrence. Mikhail Gorbachev wrote in 2007, quote, "It's becoming clear that nuclear weapons are no longer a means of achieving security. In fact, with every passing year, they make our security more precarious." On their board, General Eugene Habinger, former Commander-in-Chief to the U.S. Strategic Command. A few of the experienced, highest-level officials that have joined in public support of their call. As long as there's been war, deterrence and war strategy were identical. Mutually assured destruction was based essentially on a bipolar world. The Cold War is 20 years behind us. Nuclear weapons increase the danger of an accidental or unauthorized use, or even a deliberate nuclear exchange. With the spread of nuclear materials and know-how, and when a growing number of nuclear adversaries confront multiple perceived threats, the risk that deterrence will fail and that nuclear weapons will be used increases dramatically. It is clear that the U.S. and Russia, having led the nuclear buildup for decades, must lead the build down. Global leaders owe it to their publics to eliminate these risks. We endorse setting the goal and the reassertion of a world free of nuclear weapons. Achieving that would be consistent with America's moral heritage. Without the vision of moving toward zero, we will not find the essential cooperation required to stop our downward spiral. We need a new dialogue. We here do forever greatly honor and give gratitude to those who gave their lives so we may live. For a country by and for the people, to put their taxes where they see best, to free us from empires, militarists, misleading lies, and increasingly secret wars. Under the current situation in the world, we must make it very clear that the preparation for the use of these instruments of annihilation contain none of their courage, no bravery, none of our fallen's ultimate sacrifice, no valor, no guts, no life vision, no heroism, no care, no patriotism, no basic wisdom. Today, simply put, it's profiteering and encouraging cowardly, senseless murder, reversing all the good they hoped their lives would bring to the world.
Start uniting, planning to protect this earth, and that's the whole thing, because, if we destroy this, we got no place to live.
You're not alone. Speak up. People will gather around you.
Ever see hundreds of thousands of sincere people have hands up in a moment of silence together for our earth?
War is the most environmentally destructive thing that we have.
Because we have a strong army, we influence and we can intimidate most of the time. We are setting the precedents, and we are the example that other countries are following.
We know the wars we have and the militaries we are maintaining and building are by far the greatest cause of life-threatening global warming. They are by far the greatest consumers, greatest polluters, and destroyers of our earth, our environment, worldwide.
We don't get a peaceful through nuclear weapons controlling each other. We have to demilitarize inside.
In Deuteronomy, God said, "Today I put before you the blessing and the curse, life and death." And then God adds a line, choose life.
I keep thinking when people feel in despair, once people believed in human sacrifice, not anymore. Once people believed in slavery, not anymore. Once people believed that women were not as intelligent as men, not anymore. And I hope that in Leah's lifetime, she'll say, once people believed in nuclear weapons and not anymore, and think of the kind of society we could have.
We don't own the planet, we just are stewards for the future. And we certainly, none of us wants to hand on this legacy to those who have had nothing to do with creating it and wouldn't if they knew what we know.
People all at once, they all show up.
Yeah, the internet
so
helps.
You're building your new society online.
When you said there used to be slaves and there used to be like major gender inequality, just saying that about like nuclear weapons, to think that that could possibly not happen in the future is like a crazy thought to me.
Is it a good thought?
Yeah, that's definitely good. It's not necessary.
That's right. It's not necessary. People, they did cooperate and help each other.
That's the work that lies before us now, trying to reignite a broad general understanding of what is at stake here and why it is so urgently important.
Nor can we expect to reach our goal by contrivance, by fear, however close we sometimes seem to that dark and final abyss. Let no man of peace and freedom despair, for he does not stand alone.
Thank you, Mom, the best research assistant in the world, the archivist. If only we all could have such love, support, and joyful encouragement.
Because we all connected, you're gonna feel it. You know, nuking a country, that's part of yourself. You know, I'm going deep, but forgive me.
We're doing too much research without knowing where it's going.
If there were no nuclear weapons, then there wouldn't be any nuclear war anyway. So this isn't really a justification at all. It's a sort of after-the-fact excuse.
These weapons are just stupid and inappropriate and of no value and highly, highly dangerous. So get rid of them. That's it, and you'll all be a lot safer.
Calling for the decommissioning of nuclear weapons as being the only competent, moral, and courageous roles that leaders can take in the world today.
If we can, in every land and office, look beyond our own shores and ambitions, then surely the age will dawn in which the strong are just, and the weak secure, and the peace preserved. Ladies and gentlemen, the decision is ours. Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose or so much to gain. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.
The answer should be clear.
People, they did cooperate and help each other.